the Admiral of Hogwarts. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination, so don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like, and if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 251 Unicorn Action. Learning is a gradual process, and learning how to use firearms is naturally no exception. So, in the first day of practice, Hermione spent most of her time understanding the various structures of firearms and the weapon safety regulations. Only at the end did she try firing a magazine of bullets with a PPK pistol under the close protection of Veneto. Why do you think Veneto and the others carry these things around? On the way back to the dormitory after practice, Hermione asked Hugo curiously. I guess it's because of hobbies. Hugo shrugged and said. As far as I know, many wizards like to collect muggle items. That's right, Hermione nodded. After studying magic for 2 years, she also realized that the lethality of this weapon belonging to ordinary people is far less than that of a wand. So it is understandable that some wizards collect this out of curiosity. In the following period, the school entered a normal teaching process, and even the Dementors at the school gate did not affect the normal progress of teaching work. However, because the Boggart was killed in the last defense against the Dark Arts class, Lupin started the third-year Ravenclaw and Slytherin classes with red caps. It has to be said that Professor Lupin is indeed good at teaching. At least according to Enterprise, the knowledge taught in Lupin's class is very practical. Obviously, the students of Hogwarts are also discerning people, so even though Professor Lupin is ragged, most people still have respect for him. The reason for saying most is because Malfoy and several Slytherin students kept pointing at Professor Lupin's clothes and mocking him. However, this kind of mockery did not last long, because one day when Malfoy and his gang were pointing and commenting on Lupin's dress in the corridor, they were directly caught by Enterprise and each deducted 10 points. Malfoy, insulting a professor's dress is unacceptable. I think you should learn how to respect others, Enterprise said to Malfoy after deducting points. Regarding this matter, I will also talk to Professor Snape. I hope he can take good care of the moral qualities of certain Slytherin students. It has to be said that Enterprise's tactic of deducting points and calling parents is still very useful to Malfoy. At least after being treated like this once, Malfoy never made trouble in public again. In addition to Professor Lupin, Hagrid's teaching work has also gradually entered a better state recently. However, since the Hippogriff almost caused trouble in class, Hagrid suddenly went from one extreme to the other. As a result, his performance in class recently has been quite unstable. For example, in the last 3 classes, he introduced the rather beautiful fairies, the common magical pest Chesperfills, and the super simple and super boring flabberworms to the students. Tutoring students is really more troublesome than being with dragons. This day, taking advantage of the break, Hugo and Veneto ran to Hagrid's to drink tea. As a result, after Hagrid poured tea for them, he began to talk about the recent situation, but thanks to your reminder, otherwise something would have happened in the first class. At least I never thought before that someone would take the initiative to provoke a hippogriff after a warning. This is normal. After all, students are not warriors and cannot completely obey orders with a single command, Hugo said with a smile. By the way, what animal are you going to introduce to us next class? Narwhals, a large bird that can approach short distances. Hagrid gestured with his arms open. These narwhals were caught by the Aurors in Hogsmeade when they were cracking down on smuggling of magical creatures. Fortunately, I am familiar with the Auror in charge of the team, so I can temporarily borrow them for a week to serve as teaching aides. After chatting for a while about school and course content, the 3 gradually began to talk about various interesting things. At this moment, Hagrid talked about a strange thing he encountered in the Forbidden Forest a few days ago. A nymph has recently come to the Forbidden Forest. I don't know when. Hagrid raised his beer mug-sized teacup, took a sip of tea, and then said, "That song is the best song I have ever heard in my life." Nymph? Hugo and Veneto looked at each other, and then asked curiously, "Is the nymph you are talking about a kind of creature that belongs to the same category as Vila, but likes to live alone?" "Yes, although I can't be 100% sure, it's probably right." Saying that, Hagrid's face showed a look of reminiscence. "That's what I met the day before yesterday. At that time, I planned to go to the Forbidden Forest to check on the situation of the unicorns. As a result, when I walked into that clearing, I saw a girl with silver hair and sky blue eyes playing a harp in the moonlight. And beside her, several unicorns were dancing around her. Maybe it was because my movements were too loud, so the nymph discovered me. Then I saw her turn directly into a unicorn, and then ran into the forest with the other unicorns and disappeared. Could this be a wizard? Veneto asked, like Professor McGonagall, an animagus. Absolutely impossible. Hagrid waved his hand and said decisively, first of all, humans can only approach unicorns at most, but it is absolutely impossible to control the actions of unicorns like I saw. Secondly, animagus transformations are limited to ordinary animals and cannot become magical creatures like unicorns. That nymph was wearing a beautiful white gauze dress and holding a harp in her hand. So it means she must have been in contact with human society. After answering Veneto's question, Hagrid said, so I plan to write some notes and leave them in the Forbidden Forest recently to see if I can contact her. After all, as the darling of nature, nymphs have a much deeper understanding of various magical animals than humans, so if I can contact her, I can learn more about this knowledge. White gauze dress? Harp. After hearing Hagrid say this, Hugo and Veneto immediately thought of one person, and then immediately began to contact Counterattack and Hogsmeade through the Admiral Network. Isn't today a holiday? A somewhat ethereal voice sounded in the Admiral Network. Why did Admiral Brother think of contacting me? I have something to ask you. After confirming that he had contacted Unicorn, Hugo immediately asked, did you come to the Forbidden Forest a few days ago? Of course I came, Unicorn said happily. Compared to London, this place can be said to be great. Not only is there a pure natural forest, but also many friendly small animals. Okay, now the situation is clear. The nymph that Hagrid saw, who was not described at all in the original text, was not a sudden uninvited guest, but Unicorn who ran to the Forbidden Forest to enjoy nature. Of course, Hagrid didn't know about this. Throughout the chat, he kept talking about his ideas on how to get in touch with Unicorn, and felt that he would definitely be able to learn something from her. Chapter 252 An Unexpected Discovery. In the following period, the most important thing for most students was probably the first Quidditch match. Although the first game was Gryffindor vs Hufflepuff, the Ravenclaw team also entered training. Good job, Veneto. Roger Davies, who had just taken over as captain of the Quidditch team this year after the old captain graduated, shouted to Veneto, who had hit the bludger across the field with one strike, on the Quidditch pitch. Then he looked at the group of rookies in front of him. We need a chaser and a seeker this year, so I need to give you a test to ensure that I can choose the two players who are most compatible with the current team. Unlike Gryffindor and Slytherin, who like to choose the students with the best skills as players, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tend to choose players who are slightly less skilled but can cooperate well with the team. Therefore, in addition to basic tests, the most important thing in the selection is to let the candidates enter the team and play for a while to determine whether they have enough tacit understanding with the entire team. Veneto's task in the selection was to imitate the opposing team's beaters and test the flexibility and courage of these rookies by hitting bludgers honestly. It was really fun to watch the bludgers hit by Veneto fly past the rookies, scaring them pale and flying around the field. Unfortunately, Hugo had only watched half of it when he received a notice from Firefly asking him to go to the 5th floor of the castle to meet her, so he had to leave. Arriving on an empty corridor on the 5th floor, Hugo saw Firefly waiting there. Firefly was wearing a school uniform robe and standing in front of the mirror. What happened that you needed to call me over so urgently? Hugo asked Firefly, who was standing there, as soon as they met. What did you guys discover this time that you called me so urgently? Some very magical things, Firefly said, taking out her wand and tapping the frame of the mirror. Open to the left. As soon as the words fell, the mirror, which was more than 2 meters high, moved to the left, revealing a dark tunnel entrance. Through the light in the corridor, Hugo saw a staircase spiraling downwards inside the entrance. Wait, this place seems familiar, Hugo thought for a moment, then quickly recalled a passage from the original novel in his mind. If I remember correctly, this should be a secret passage leading to Hogsmeade. That's right, this is indeed a secret passage. I think that besides us, only the Weasley twins know about this place in the school now, Firefly said through the Admiral Network as she walked ahead, but now only we should come here, because the central part of the tunnel collapsed last winter, so the Weasley twins gave up on this place. As for the reason why we came here, it's very simple, because we hope to use this abandoned tunnel to rebuild a new tunnel, and then use it as our exclusive secret passage. The reason why we called you over today, Admiral, is because we discovered something unexpected during the construction of the tunnel. so we need you to make the final decision." Knowing that the ship girls would not harm him, Hugo followed Firefly down the spiral staircase. In his opinion, this should be the ship girls wanting to give him a surprise. The two of them walked down the stone staircase for quite a long time before their feet touched the ground. If he wasn't mistaken, they were now located 3 or 4 floors underground. Unlike the imagined secret tunnel, this tunnel was huge in height and width, and looked very straight. It even felt like a Hogwarts thestral carriage could drive through it. On both sides of the corridor were fixed stone braziers, with dim yellow flames burning on top. However, when Hugo curiously reached out to the brazier, he found that these braziers had no temperature at all. The flames burning in these braziers are not real flames, but the simplest magical light, Firefly explained, sensing Hugo's actions through the Admiral network, and the whole thing is connected to the magic system of Hogwarts Castle. In other words, this tunnel was built together with the entire castle. After hearing Firefly's answer, Hugo was first stunned, then relieved. After all, the overall situation of Hogwarts Castle was very bad when it was built, so as a school, fortress, and refuge, it was very reasonable to have a secret troop transport and evacuation tunnel. After advancing for about 10 minutes, the road was completely blocked by a large pile of collapsed rocks and soil. At this time, Firefly walked to the side of the tunnel and then forcefully moved a large rock, more than 1 person tall, to the side. This place has a strange interference effect on various magic powers, and it is even more interference in certain aspects. However, we have not yet figured out the rules, so in order to avoid danger, we can only take pure physical means to solve the problem, Firefly explained, then led Hugo into the newly dug hole. At the beginning, there was only dirt and rock around, but after walking for more than 10 meters, a fork suddenly appeared at the front end. The tunnel on the right was dug by a few of us, trying to bypass the collapsed section in the original tunnel and reopen this tunnel. And the tunnel on the left is our new discovery. The ship girls did not need lighting when digging in the dark, but used radar, sonar, and other detection methods to carry out their work. And it was because of the existence of sonar that they discovered this other secret tunnel located next to the ancient tunnel. Turning left and stepping into the tunnel discovered by the ship girls, Hugo saw the full picture of this tunnel through the searchlight turned on by Firefly. This was a tunnel that looked very old, and the overall construction was very refined. Unlike the tunnel that Hugo and the others had passed through before, the stones in this tunnel were trimmed very regularly, and even patterns could be seen carved on them. As Hugo and the others continued to move forward, abandoned rooms began to appear on both sides of the tunnel. According to Firefly, these rooms may have been dormitories, warehouses, and some spaces containing magical instruments of unknown purpose in the past. The magic intensity in the entire area is unusually high, and in the previous exploratory excavations, we discovered some strange structures, and they are filled with magic. According to Indomitable and the others' analysis, those structures should be a part of the magic defense system that Hogwarts Castle is currently operating. While reporting her findings, Firefly led Hugo forward. Finally, after walking for more than 10 meters, they stopped at the entrance of a small cave. Looking into the cave, Hugo was surprised to find that Renown, Indomitable, Illustrious, and St. George were waiting here. Behind them, a gate covered with runes and cast from some unknown metal stood there. Chapter 253 Space behind the door. My dear Admiral, you've finally arrived. Seeing Hugo emerge from the tunnel, Headmaid Renown opened her arms in a welcoming gesture. What exactly is going on with this door? After hugging each of the ship girls, Hugo asked Renown, the flagship here. And what discoveries have you made about it so far? As for discoveries, there are many. For example, the carvings on the side of the door confirm that this place is indeed a very important location belonging to Hogwarts. Indomitable pointed to the side of the door, and Hugo noticed a stone tablet carved with the green serpentine. The content on the stone tablet was simple, merely commemorating the completion of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. After all, this place was originally just Slytherin's private castle, and some renovations were definitely needed to use it as a school. Weasley, Potter, Gaunt, Burke, Black. Looking at the names carved at the end of the stone tablet, Hugo didn't recognize who these people were, but the familiar surnames were enough to tell him something clearly. Although Hogwarts was said to have been built by the 4 founders, it received support from many pure-blood wizarding families during the construction process. Something strange. After reading the entire inscription, Hugo's mind was filled with doubts. It feels like this stone tablet is subconsciously hiding the purpose of this building. Actually, this door was hidden in the stone wall when we arrived before, Renown said to Hugo. At the time, We were very curious about what this serpentine stone tablet represented, so we conducted various experiments here. In the beginning, we used many kinds of detection magic, but basically, they were useless. The complex magical power around us interfered with all our reconnaissance methods, but later, Indomitable accidentally tracked down a certain power that was somewhat familiar to us, so we finally found this door, and this thing is our key. Illustrious opened her ship's space and took out a silver diadem inlaid with a huge blue gemstone, Ravenclaw's diadem. Looking at the familiar diadem, Hugo's face showed a surprised expression. Has the soul fragment inside been completely dealt with? Of course, it's been dealt with, Illustrious said with a smile. Moreover, we also restored this item to its best condition, just like it was on Ravenclaw's head back then. Just as Illustrious took out the diadem, a large number of mysterious runes suddenly appeared on the door in front of them. At the same time, it began to vibrate, but it quickly calmed down. According to my research, this door requires someone who has signed a contract with Hogwarts and is wearing the diadem to open it. Enterprise, Veneto, and Firefly have all tried but failed to open it, Indomitable said. I suspect this is because in that era, wizards, or even the entire human race, were in a disadvantageous position, so this kind of area should only allow pure humans to open this door when they hold a token. Okay, I understand. Hugo nodded and reached out to Illustrious. Give me the diadem, let me try to open this door, it should be fine, at least that's what Indomitable's research shows, Illustrious said as she handed the diadem in her hand to Hugo. Don't worry, we will be by your side during this process, and we can help you solve any problems. Of course, I trust you guys, Hugo said, putting on Ravenclaw's diadem. The moment he put the diadem on his head, Hugo quieted down and gently narrowed his eyes. Wearing this diadem, what does it feel like? Sensing that everything was normal with Hugo through the Admiral network, Indomitable leaned forward and asked curiously. Hugo opened his eyes and found that, apart from Indomitable, all the other shipgirls had also curiously gathered around, looking at him with a questioning expression. Didn't you wear it after you cleaned it up? After hearing Indomitable's question, Hugo asked with some confusion. Your initiative shouldn't be so low before I give an order, right? Of course, we've tried it, or rather, most of the people here have tried wearing this diadem. Indomitable raised her eyebrows and said. Unfortunately, we didn't feel any change after wearing this diadem, and according to later research, we found that Ravenclaw's diadem and this door have the same safety magic, so the diadem naturally won't be of any use to us. I see, Hugo nodded and said. At least I can feel that the diadem can serve two purposes now. On the one hand, it can calm people down and focus their attention, and on the other hand, it can allow people to perform multi-threaded thinking at the same time. From a certain point of view, the diadem can indeed enhance a person's wisdom because it allows the user to perform multi-threaded thinking with all their might. It's equivalent to several users focusing on dealing with one thing, but from another point of view, the diadem is indeed different from the way most people think of increasing wisdom. If you don't have extraordinary wisdom yourself, the diadem can't let you gain higher wisdom out of thin air based on your current foundation, but this thing is not a universally applicable alchemical product. Hugo looked at the diadem and said, for ordinary people, maintaining this calm and multi-threaded state for a long time may really drive them crazy. Of course, Hugo himself was not worried about this. At least, with the Admiral network, he could completely immunize himself from this problem after getting used to the thing on his head. Hugo walked to the door in front of him and injected magic power into several places on the door in order according to Indomitable's instructions. The magic power quickly activated the rune array on the metal door. The heavy metal door then began to vibrate. As the runes on it lit up one by one, it slowly and solemnly slid open to both sides in front of everyone inside the metal door. There was also a layer of energy barrier as pure as water. And through this barrier, everything inside the door was displayed in front of Hugo and the ship girls. This wasn't the cave that everyone imagined, but it was even more bizarre than the imagined cave. Platforms composed of a large number of crystals of various colors floated in the dark space, emitting light to illuminate the surrounding environment between the platforms. Stairs also made of crystals of various colors connected them together, like a necklace threading gems. And in this vast space, one thing attracted everyone's attention. That was a huge golden door 2 or 3 stories high, with various reliefs on it, and in the very center of the door, the Hogwarts school crest shone brightly. This is a real masterpiece. Looking at the metallic door, Indomitable immediately recognized the material of the door. It's actually made of orichalcum. Let's go in. After observing at the door for a while, Hugo was the first to walk into the door. Then, He successfully passed through the barrier and walked towards the door located in the center of the space. The ship girls also followed him in single file. What they didn't know was that at the same time, a hole only the size of a fist appeared in an inconspicuous corner of the Ravenclaw tower. Then, a rat with a missing claw on its front paw looked at the hole and crawled in. Chapter 254 Sleeping Dragon Do Not Disturb. This shouldn't be a huge space that appeared beneath Hogwarts, but rather some kind of space expansion magic was used. As soon as Undaunted entered this space, she discovered the truth of it, so whatever is behind that door is worth studying. Hugo looked at the space and the golden door in the distance and said, or rather, what needs to be hidden by these things? Following the stone steps to the center of the space, they stepped onto the platform where the golden door was located. Unlike the previous small platforms, this platform floated with light spots. If you looked closely, you would find that the light spots were actually leaves, petals, or snowflakes made of light. Fortunately, this door didn't require solving any puzzles, because there was a hand-shaped groove in the very center of the door. After Hugo pressed his hands on the groove, the entire door slowly blurred and then disappeared. Wow! After the door disappeared, the ship girls simultaneously exclaimed in surprise, because behind the door was not a dark cave or a complex underground building, but a plain with blue skies and grassland. This isn't a space transfer facility like the Flu Network or a portkey. The ship girls were very sensitive to these kinds of things, so they quickly figured out what was behind this door. If I'm not mistaken, this should be a subspace created with ancient rune magic, and it's even the top-level kind that can have its own ecosystem. Undaunted said with a respectful tone, this technology is still preserved today, such as Newt's suitcase, but building a space as large as this is much more difficult than the space inside Newt's suitcase. Contrary to what they had imagined, after entering this space, Hugo and the others immediately saw the core of the space, because in the center of this field, a huge golden oak tree stood tall. Wait, just as the group was walking along the stone path towards the oak tree, St. George suddenly stepped forward and stopped Hugo and the others, while also deploying her ship equipment. Do you still remember Hogwarts' motto, never tickle a sleeping dragon? How could we forget that? Hugo replied with a smile. Then watched St. George's expression slowly become serious. Did you find a dragon here? At this moment, Hugo suddenly remembered that St. George, in addition to being the Guardian of England, also had an important title as a dragon slayer, so her being so nervous now was likely because she had discovered something related to dragons, or even dragons themselves. I can feel it, it's under that oak tree. St. George nodded solemnly, while looking at the roots of the golden oak tree. Soon she had a discovery and transmitted everything she saw into the Admiral network. There were two dragons, only the size of cows, but possessing a powerful aura. One white and one red. Countless thick roots bound their limbs, while a hazy golden glow enveloped their bodies. Beside the two dragons, many broken fragments of crystal rune stones scattered around the ground could be seen. However, judging from the runes remaining on these fragments and the distribution of the runestones, this should be a sealing magic. I can feel the information left here by the predecessors, St. George said. Ever since she noticed the two dragons, certain characteristics of her quickly triggered the message left to future generations by the creator of this space. What is this? Looking at the oak tree and the two dragons, one red and one white. Hugo had some guesses in his heart, but he still hoped to get accurate information from St. George. This is where Merlin used his staff to seal the Saxon white dragon and the Welsh red dragon, St. George exclaimed uncontrollably. How did he do it? Is that difficult? Radiance looked at her sister in confusion and asked, didn't you once kill a dragon? Why do you seem so shocked? Dragons are not all the same. Looking at the two dragons releasing powerful energy in her field of vision, St. George smiled wryly and said, the one I killed was a poison dragon, which is at the bottom of the true dragon food chain, although its frontal combat ability is far superior to the current fire dragons. It has a clear gap compared to other true dragons. It turned out that Western dragons were also divided into several levels. The existing four-limbed dragons with only hind claws and wings can only be called dragon beasts, because they only have the instinct of beasts. What St. George called true dragons were actually six-limbed creatures several times larger than the current dragons. Possessing front and hind claws and wings, they were powerful because they possessed intelligence similar to humans and unique dragon language magic. Their history is even longer than that of humans, St. George introduced to everyone, but their powerful strength and combative nature not only resulted in low reproductive capacity, but also a fondness for infighting. So even more than 1,000 years ago, their numbers were extremely scarce, not even enough to maintain the population. Instead, their degraded descendants, the fire dragons, have multiplied to this day. but those true dragons are also divided into different grades. The poison dragon I killed is one of the most cunning types of true dragons. Although its frontal combat ability is far superior to the current fire dragons, it has a clear gap compared to other true dragons. The reason why these two true dragons are mythical dragons is because they used their power to gain the worship of ancient people, and thus gained the power of faith. That's why whether it's Riva or Merlin, they can only seal them. Because as long as one person remembers their legend, they can be resurrected somewhere. Why do these two dragons sound quite similar to us? After hearing this, Firefly asked curiously, doesn't a large part of our power also come from people's memories? That's right, little bug. St. George nodded and said, however, compared to them, we use the power of faith more perfectly. Alright, so what should we do next? After the ship girls finished discussing topics related to ship girls, Hugo asked, did we come here just to take a look at these things? Actually, this is the best option. Before Hugo could finish speaking, Victory appeared in front of him and said, at least until you get the intermediate avatar enhancement. I don't recommend you do anything to this cycle system. Is it because my strength is not enough? Hugo looked at Victory in front of him with a wry smile. To be honest, the feeling of having such a treasure in front of you but not being able to use it was really terrible. Yes, Victory nodded solemnly. Although we can fight them to a draw here, it would be too much of a loss to fight without any benefits, but that doesn't mean we'll come back empty-handed, Victory said as she flew to the trunk of the golden oak tree. A few minutes later, she flew back with something. You can take this away, Victory said, taking out a bracelet from behind her. This bracelet was woven from golden branches and leaves, and in the center of the bracelet, two gem-like scales, one red and one white, were inlaid there, shining brightly. There is a huge amount of magic power stored inside, and mobilizing it in an emergency is also a very strong force. Chapter 255 Bogart. Although, due to their power levels, Hugo and the others could only keep the two dragons in place, they were satisfied with a production of one dragon scale ring per week because after obtaining the ring, Hugo discovered that it contained powerful, non-attribute magic that could be called upon for various purposes at any time. According to Unyielding, these materials were not so much objects as they were the embodiment of some kind of power, making them extremely rare and precious items. You can take this and study it first, Hugo said, taking off the bracelet from his wrist and handing it to Unyielding after learning the specifics of the bracelet. I have Veneto with me usually, so I won't need it for now. After dealing with the bracelet, the next issue was how to handle this space. Fortunately, many of the ship girls were skilled in underground bunker construction, so it wasn't too much of a problem. According to the ship girls' plan, they would build a hidden bunker here and then rebuild the tunnel on the other side. If there are no problems, the project here can be completed in a week, Renown said when they said goodbye. Oh, right, when we came, Repulse asked me to tell you that you must visit their shop next Hogsmeade Day. Definitely next time, Hugo said, nodding. By the way, how does Zufang feel after coming here? Is there anything she's not used to? No, she gets along very well with everyone here, Renown said. And after she came, the new Japanese cuisine introduced in the restaurant was immediately welcomed by everyone. When they returned to the castle, the Ravenclaw Quidditch team had also successfully recruited new players. According to Davis, these players were at least commendable in terms of willpower. Seriously, being able to follow orders and make moves even when a bludger is whistling past at close range, they definitely have good development potential, Veneto said during dinner. Having helped with the selection process throughout, it's a pity that Davis still reached a compromise with the other Quidditch teams. Unless the opponent uses foul tactics, I can only be a substitute in the game. The reason for this was simple. Last year, after a Slytherin player attacked a Ravenclaw beater with a bat, Veneto went on the field. As a result, she only spent 10 minutes using bludgers to knock out 6 of the 10 Slytherin players, including substitutes. Naturally, Slytherin, who couldn't even gather enough people for the game, ended up losing miserably with a score of 30-270. From then on, when the other teams played against Ravenclaw, there were far fewer foul tactics, for fear of accidentally letting Veneto on the field, and Ravenclaw itself was not as flamboyant as Gryffindor, so they agreed with the other teams that as long as they didn't actively foul or play dirty, Veneto would always be a substitute and would not play. Of course, this was not a bad thing, because compared to the other team members who had to train 3 times a week in cold, rainy weather, Veneto only needed to train for half a session each on 2 of those days. This is everyone's unanimous decision. Veneto was initially worried that this training method would make the other teammates unhappy, but after asking, Davis gave an unexpected answer. Your presence does improve everyone's level, but everyone thinks that you only need to participate in training once a week, Davis said, looking at Veneto with some helplessness. Otherwise, everyone will develop bludger phobia. One afternoon, after Veneto completed her training mission and left the field amidst the relieved gazes of her teammates, she cleaned up as usual and prepared to find Hugo, only to see people gathered around the notice board in the common room, discussing something. First time going to Hogsmeade for the weekend, Hugo said, squeezing out of the crowd as Veneto approached, then pointing to the notice board. End of October. Halloween Eve. Sounds good, Veneto nodded. We can just go to Counteradac's sister's place for a free feast, and then buy some interesting things. After discussing the arrangements for Hogsmeade Day, Hugo and Veneto were about to go to the library to read with Hermione, who was already there. But just as they were halfway there, they saw Peeves flying through the corridor with a box of cleaning supplies. Haha, 2 bookworms, little dummies. After seeing Hugo and Veneto, Peeves wiggled his toes and sang. Hugo didn't want to pay attention to him, but Peeves didn't intend to let them go. Look at the gift Peeves has for you. Feeling slighted after discovering that Hugo and the others were ignoring him, Peeves suddenly became angry and threw the box he was holding 7 or 8 meters in front of Hugo and the others. Then he flew away quickly. What does this mean? Hugo looked at the box not far away with a puzzled expression. But at this moment, the box suddenly shook and vibrated continuously on the ground. Let me see what this is. Knowing that there wouldn't be any dangerous items in the school now, Veneto walked up and cast an unlocking spell on the box. The lid of the box flipped open violently, and then Hugo's corpse popped out of the box, lying there in a strange posture, with streams of blood flowing down his face, forming a pool of blood on the ground. Bogart. Hugo immediately understood what was in the box and took out his wand and walked up. As a result, with a burst, Hugo's corpse turned into Veneto. However, unlike the Veneto beside him, this Veneto had a very dull look in her eyes, and she was wearing a black robe with purple patterns. Deep sea Veneto. At the first sight of this thing, Hugo realized what it was, and then understood the fear in the depths of his heart. So I'm also afraid of death. Realizing this, the Bogart was naturally useless. So Hugo pointed his wand at the Bogart and chanted, ridiculous. A burst of noise, like the sound of a whip cracking. Deep sea Veneto slipped and fell, and the patterns on her body turned into colorful paper cutouts, constantly falling down. She could only frantically try to pick up the pattern. Seeing this scene, the corners of Hugo's mouth curled up slightly, preparing to step forward and give this Bogart a final blow with laughter, when a burst of footsteps suddenly came from behind. Professor Lupin, is there anything wrong? Turning his head, Hugo saw Lupin, wearing a somewhat worn robe, running from the other end of the corridor. Don't kill this Bogart yet, Lupin said breathlessly. The last time I taught Gryffindor, that Bogart was destroyed, so I need a new Bogart as a teaching tool. I just heard Filch say that a cabinet with a Bogart hiding in it was taken away by Peeves, so I chased after it all the way. I didn't expect you to solve the problem so quickly. Then this Bogart is yours, Professor. Hugo immediately stepped aside after hearing Lupin's words and gave the Bogart to Lupin. Then pulled Veneto away. When they, Hugo and Veneto, walked to the corner of the stairs and were about to go upstairs, they saw the Bogart turn into a silver-white sphere hanging in the air, and was gradually suppressed by Lupin back into the repaired box. Chapter 256 Hogsmeade Tour. Almost all third-year students were talking about their first trip to Hogsmeade, and no one wanted to miss it. A wooden box appeared in the Ravenclaw common room, and the young wizards only needed to put in their permission slip signed by their parents or guardians every morning. This wooden box would grow 4 legs and trot out of the room, then go to Professor Flitwick's office to spit out the forms. On this morning before Halloween, there were more people eating breakfast in the Great Hall than usual, especially the third-year students, almost all of whom were eating breakfast while chatting about what they would do after going to Hogsmeade. Of course, not everyone was so happy. For example, Hugo saw Harry sitting at the table looking dejected, with Ron beside him seemingly trying to comfort him. Don't worry, Harry, you'll always find a chance in the future. After finishing breakfast, Hugo and the others walked to Harry's side and comforted him. We'll bring you some of the local specialties, thank you, but don't worry about me. Harry tried to put on an indifferent look. I can use this opportunity to finish my holiday homework. The group arrived in the entrance hall together, and then Harry said goodbye to everyone and returned upstairs. At this time, Filch was already waiting at the door, checking a long list, vigilantly staring at each face, not letting anyone who shouldn't go out slip through the door. Staying behind, Potter, Malfoy shouted when he saw Harry going upstairs. He, Crabbe, and Goyle were all standing in the line. Afraid of running into Dementors, I think there must be something between Malfoy and Potter. Seeing this scene, Venato's eyes flickered with strange light. This kind of provocation is too much like a lover's quarrel, but they're both boys. Hermione, who was beside her, was taken aback by Venato's words. After all, in the early 1990s, the atmosphere in Europe was still very conservative, and some things were not recognized by the public. Yes, but we should be tolerant. Venato had a compassionate expression on his face, looking full of sacred light. Okay, stop teasing my sister, Hugo said to Venato through the Admiral network. You know, my sister likes to split hairs in many places. It would be troublesome if she took it seriously. Soon, Filch finished checking the list and let everyone out. Hugo and the others' first stop was to follow the crowd to Honeydukes' sweet shop. Honeydukes was crowded with Hogwarts students, and along the walls were shelves lined up one after another. These shelves were filled with all kinds of tempting sweets, large slabs of creamy peanut brittle, shimmering pink coconut ice, rows upon rows of hundreds of different kinds of chocolates, a large barrel of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, a barrel of fizzing Whizzbees, and so on. On the other side, the room was filled with various candies with special effects. For example, Drooble's Best Blowing Gum, which produced bluebell-colored bubbles that wouldn't pop for days, pepper imps that made you breathe fire from your nose, fudge flies that made toad-shaped peppermint creams jump in your stomach, brittle sugar quills, and exploding bonbons. Vampires think this stuff tastes good, Venato said, looking at a plate of lollipops with a bloody smell. I heard there's also a top-quality one made with dragon blood, which can only be pre-ordered and can't be bought on the market at all. After spending more than 10 minutes shopping at Honeydukes, Hugo and the others squeezed out of the crowd and walked forward along the road. After only a few steps, Venato pointed to a parchment in the window and said, "We need to hurry up a bit." A notice was posted in the window, which read, "By order of the Ministry of Magic, customers please note, until further notice, Dementors will patrol the streets of Hogsmeade every day after sunset. This measure is purely for the safety of Hogsmeade residents and will be cancelled as soon as Sirius Black is recaptured. Customers are advised to complete their purchases before evening." It is indeed a bit bad, so we only need to take a look at the Owl post office from the outside, which will save a lot of time, Hugo said, looking at the notice, "but we must go to the Three Broomsticks. I heard they have the best butterbeer in Britain." "Are you talking about beer?" Hermione leaned in and asked. "I don't think we're old enough to drink alcoholic beverages, at least not before 5th year." "You're right, sis," Hugo shrugged at Hermione, "but there's no alcohol in butterbeer. It's just a non-alcoholic beverage made with ginger." Although they persuaded Hermione, they still didn't go into the Three Broomsticks pub because it was crowded with people. Fortunately, they finally found a good place to drink butterbeer after visiting the Owl post office. It was noon. After looking at the time, the three of them left the center of Hogsmeade and turned onto a small road to have lunch. There was a small pub at the intersection. A dilapidated wooden sign hung on a rusty bracket above the door, with a picture of a severed boar's head, bloodstains seeping through the white cloth covering it. This was a Burforth's Hogshead pub, a good place for underground transactions. But Hugo and the others didn't enter, but continued forward past the empty doorway of the pub. On the original open space of the Hogshead pub, a 2-story building with a turret stood there, and a burst of music faintly came from the house, followed by the aroma of food. On the door of the small building, a sign spelled out the words "The Dockside Diner" in letters shining with magical brilliance, and next to the letters hung a red painted iron anchor. Pushing open the door, the sound of music and the aroma of food immediately became richer, and then a young waiter appeared in front of them. "How many guests are there?" "3. After Hugo finished speaking, he followed the waiter forward. The room contained small square tables for 2 or 4 people, separated from each other by brown partitions inlaid with glass. Soon, they were seated in a partition. "This doesn't feel like the style of wizards." After hanging his robe on the back of his chair, Hermione looked around and said, "It feels more like the decoration style of those Michelin restaurants in London." "Yes, this is the decoration style of Muggle restaurants," the waiter who brought them the menu said. "Our boss said that as a new store, she thinks differentiated competition can better open up the market." "It seems your boss has quite a business sense," Hugo said, taking the menu. Because it was still about half an hour before mealtime, the occupancy rate in the store was already close to 90%. After ordering a few dishes full of exotic flavors, Hugo then ran to the back of the restaurant under the pretext of going to the restroom, and then met Rebuttal, who was waiting at a back door. "I should have seen Sirius Black," Rebuttal said directly after seeing Hugo. These days, we have been picking out edible leftovers to feed stray cats and dogs. The black dog that comes almost every day is likely to be Sirius Black. Don't act rashly yet." After hearing that Sirius Black had been found, Hugo thought for a few seconds, and then said, "You'd better lock down his current location first, and I'll find someone to talk to him when there's a chance. Don't worry about that, the unicorn will complete this task." After hearing Hugo's order, Rebuttal said, "The other party's entire reconnaissance ability is not weak, but he shouldn't have noticed the unicorn's reconnaissance planes disguised as small birds. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 257 Banquet and Raid. In the time that followed, Hugo and his friends enjoyed a delicious meal filled with exotic flavors, and then plunged into exploring the Pure Wizard Village. Their final stop on the tour was the Shrieking Shack, located on a small hill. "Do you think this house could be sold?" Veneto suddenly asked, looking at the lonely building on the hilltop through a wire fence. "Probably," Hermione said, thinking for a moment. "After all, even though this place is known as the most haunted location in all of Britain, I didn't find the Shrieking Shack's name listed in the Ministry of Magic's Registry of Dangerous Buildings. I estimate the price of this place wouldn't be too high, but anyone who wants to buy it must master the skills of ghost banishing. Otherwise, the cost of hiring professionals from the Ministry of Magic to complete these tasks would skyrocket." After descending from the hill where the Shrieking Shack was located, it was already past 4 p.m. So, the three of them returned to Hogwarts Castle with a large pile of loot they had just purchased at this time. Filch was standing in the entrance hall, just like in the morning, holding a magical detector in his hand, staring at the incoming and outgoing young wizards, occasionally ordering a certain student to stop for him to check. Mrs. Norris circled around him, staring vigilantly at the entering students from time to time. Clearly, after each Hogsmeade day, the amount of various contraband in the castle would reach a peak. And Filch was now planning to ban those dangerous items from entering from the source. Fortunately, Filch's main target was students from Gryffindor, so Ravenclaws like Hugo and his friends could easily blend in with the crowd and slip directly into the school to avoid inspection. After entering the castle, they didn't immediately return to the Ravenclaw Tower, but waited in an empty classroom on the 3rd floor. A few minutes later, the Weasley twins walked into the classroom, playfully bickering. "All right, here are your things." Seeing the Weasley twins enter, Hugo and his friends took out some of the raw materials they had asked them to bring into the school. When faced with Filch's search, the Weasley twins naturally had some ways to resist. And the simplest way was to specifically ask people to help them bring the contraband into the castle separately. Of course, there was a selection process for whom they asked to help bring things. For example, if it was Hugo and his friends, they would only ask them to carry things like raw materials, and would not carry those prank toys. "Thanks," Fred said, then counted the packages and asked, "You seem to have given us some extra things." "These aren't for you," Hugo said with a smile, shaking his head. "You should know that Harry can't go to Hogsmeade this year because he didn't get his permission slip signed, so we, as friends, plan to bring him some snacks and treats." "Understood, we will help you deliver these things to Harry," George said earnestly, taking the box. They knew that Harry had been living with the Granger family almost every day since last summer when he stayed at the Burrow, so they understood Hugo and his friends' current practice of sending gifts to Harry. After asking the Weasley twins to give those gifts to Harry, Hugo and his friends returned to the Ravenclaw Tower to tidy up and prepare for dinner, because it was Halloween. So this year the Great Hall was decorated in Halloween style. As in previous years, hundreds of pumpkin lanterns hung in the hall, along with a group of fluttering bats and many orange streamers spitting flames, lazily floating under the ceiling, like brilliant water snakes. "Every time I see these decorations, I always marvel at the greatness of magic," Hugo said softly to Veneto after sitting in his seat. "At least these bats are much cleaner than real bats." "You're right," Veneto nodded in agreement, watching a group of bats fly over the dishes. "So, I'm now very curious, how exactly did they make those European medieval pies with dozens of live birds inside them?" "I think they probably wouldn't eat that pie, because, unfortunately," Hugo was interrupted by Hermione before he could finish speaking. "My dear brother, it's dinner time now, so don't talk about those disgusting topics, okay, sister?" Hugo smiled at his sister next to him, and then began to change the subject. Fortunately, there were always many things worth talking about at the Halloween feast, especially since today was the first Hogsmeade day for the third-year students, so as long as they talked about topics related to Hogsmeade, it would always arouse a lot of resonance. However, this Hogsmeade day also brought some not-so-good side effects. For example, Hugo saw many third-year students and some higher-grade students at the table looking at the rich food on the table with tangled expressions. Obviously, they had eaten too many snacks and other things in Hogsmeade, so that now when they saw the delicious food on the table, there wasn't much space in their stomachs to hold them. Fortunately, Hugo and Hermione had thought of this beforehand, so they bought a lot of snacks but managed to resist the temptation to eat them, so they could just enjoy this feast. As for Veneto, her appetite was much higher than ordinary humans. Everyone at the banquet was very happy. Even Lupin, who was about to face a transformed werewolf, was in high spirits and chatting with head of house Professor Flitwick about something. Finally, the entire banquet ended with an entertainment program provided by the ghosts of Hogwarts. The ghosts suddenly appeared from the walls and tables to perform a parade. Gryffinder's nearly headless Nick successfully recreated the situation of his beheading that year. This night was so pleasant. The rich and delicious food and wonderful performances made every young wizard feel satisfied, so that everyone was chattering all the way back, appearing very happy. However, just as everyone entered the common room, had just changed into some more comfortable clothes, and was preparing to chat for a while before going to sleep, Professor Flitwick suddenly climbed up from the bottom of the stairs, and then asked them to bring their wands and some necessities to gather in the Great Hall. What happened, Professor? Prefect Penelope asked. At this time, the students also focused their attention on Professor Flitwick. An emergency has occurred. The fat lady's portrait at the entrance of the Gryffindor common room has been destroyed. According to the fat lady's accusation, the one who committed this atrocity was the wanted criminal Sirius Black. Professor Flitwick briefly described what had just happened, and then amplified his voice to say to everyone present, so now everyone must gather in the Great Hall, and then the teachers will conduct a large-scale search of the entire castle. Hearing Flitwick say this, everyone present became nervous, so soon everyone packed their things and followed Professor Flitwick out of the common room. As if Sirius Black was hiding in the common room, ready to attack everyone at any moment. When everyone arrived at the Great Hall, they found that the people from the other three houses were already all here because the common rooms were closer, but many people's faces were half dazed and half fearful. The teachers and I will conduct a thorough search of the castle, Professor Dumbledore said to the students after everyone had arrived. At this time, Professor McGonagall and Flitwick closed all the doors of the Great Hall. For your own safety, I think you may have to spend the night here. I ask the prefects to stand guard at the entrance of the Great Hall, and the male and female student presidents to stay in the Great Hall to be responsible for management. Report anything to me immediately. After speaking, Professor Dumbledore magically moved away the tables and chairs, and then waved his wand to conjure hundreds of sleeping bags. Then he closed the door and walked out of the Great Hall, and after Professor Dumbledore left, a burst of excited whispering immediately sounded in the hall. Many people went to inquire with familiar Gryffindor students, in order to find out what had happened before. Chapter 258 Meeting Sirius. Everyone, get in your sleeping bags. Just as everyone was huddled together chattering, Percy's loud shout suddenly came from the side. Quick, no one speak. Lights out in 10 minutes, alright, we'd better find a place to lie down first. After looking at the surrounding situation, Hugo said to the two ladies beside him, then grabbed a sleeping bag each and ran to an inconspicuous place in the hall. Everyone around was discussing how Sirius Black had gotten in. Obviously, the fact that an extremely dangerous terrorist could break into what was considered the safest place in the British magical world was enough to make most people feel uneasy. Hermione was especially uneasy, because she had read the entire book Hogwarts, a history, so she knew exactly how many powerful defensive spells had been placed on this castle in its 1,000-year history. The castle is also protected by various spells to prevent outsiders from sneaking in. Simple disillusionment won't work. Magical disguises and flying methods can't fool the Dementors either. And Filch knows all the secret passages, and they'll seal them all up. Hermione babbled on about the defensive details of the castle that she had read in her book, the confusion on her face deepening as she spoke. As she chattered, many people around her subconsciously gathered to listen to her words. Soon, Percy extinguished the lights in the hall and asked everyone to get into their sleeping bags and remain quiet. The candles were indeed extinguished, but everyone was still whispering and exchanging opinions while everyone was listening to Hermione's discourse on Hogwarts Castle. Hugo, taking advantage of the dim starlight in the hall, contacted Enterprise, who was also being mobilized at this time, and found that she was walking hurriedly on the lawn outside the castle gate. Didn't Dumbledore just ask the faculty to search the castle together? Why are you outside now? Because of my former Auror status, Headmaster Dumbledore asked Hagrid and me to check the perimeter of the castle. Enterprise was holding her wand and running forward in small steps. I think we can take this opportunity to talk to Sirius. That's indeed a good idea, both from my destiny points and other perspectives. Hugo agreed with Enterprise's plan, but he quickly thought of a problem. Do you know where Sirius is now? Of course, I know, because Unicorn's plane and I have been scouting around the school these past few days, so I just saw Sirius running from the tunnel entrance under the Whomping Willow. Enterprise said Sirius choosing this tunnel as an escape route was also a last resort, because opening the other tunnels required using a wand to cast spells, and he didn't have a wand as for passing through the Dementors guarding the entrance in dog form. That wasn't a good idea either, because after being imprisoned in Azkaban for a long time, Sirius's resistance to Dementors was extremely poor. It would be terrible if he reverted to his human form at the entrance. Won't chasing after him to Hogsmeade arouse Dumbledore's suspicion? Seeing Enterprise summon her bald eagle Patronus and walk out of the school gate, Hugo asked with some concern. Don't worry, Dumbledore asked me to go to Hogsmeade before, Enterprise said as she walked forward along the dark path. Hagrid is mainly responsible for the school grounds, while I am responsible for searching the road connecting the two. Soon, Enterprise arrived near Hogsmeade. But she didn't enter the dark town. Instead, she turned a corner and walked into a woodland on the edge of the town. This was a rather low cave, which seemed to only allow one person to enter while bending over. A musty stench was slowly out of the cave. From the bats going in and out of the cave entrance, it could be seen that this cave should be a bat's nest if Unicorn hadn't hidden his carrier-based aircraft inside while Sirius was away and observed his hiding place these past few days. It was estimated that no one would have thought that Sirius could hide in this place. Enterprise naturally wouldn't crawl into the tunnel to engage in close combat with Sirius in a pile of bat droppings. So, she took out 2 tear gas grenades from her ship's equipment space, opened the safety and pulled a pin, and threw them in. Soon, a cloud of white smoke billowed out of the cave. At the same time, a series of dense footsteps quickly came from the depths of the cave, followed by a large, shaggy, disheveled black dog rushing out of the white mist. Woof! Seeing Enterprise standing there, Sirius directly bared his fangs and claws and pounced. As a result, Enterprise didn't step back or dodge to the side to give him a way out as he had imagined, but directly threw a punch. You're not even using a wand. Seeing that Enterprise didn't take out her wand, Sirius subconsciously tilted his head slightly. He felt that at this time, he only needed to rely on his size advantage to knock Enterprise away, and there was no need to bite this witch with a bang. Enterprise's palm and Sirius's dog had made contact. Sirius felt for a moment that he had bumped into a large rock, but before he could react, he passed out. What's going on? A few minutes later, Sirius woke up. As a result, he found that he had returned to his human form and was tied to the trunk of a large tree, and opposite him was a witch holding a wand. Alright, stop pretending to be unconscious, Sirius. Enterprise held the wand and tapped it lightly on her other hand, then looked at Sirius, who was pretending to be dead with his eyes closed, and said, "Where's Harry?" Originally, Sirius wanted to pretend to be unconscious to find an opportunity to ambush, but at this time, he could only open his eyes and ask. Panting heavily, perhaps because of the long-term imprisonment, his body had developed problems, so he could only make a gasping roar, which sounded like a sick beast. Harry. Enterprise slowly walked to Sirius's side and said, "What do you want to do now that you're asking about Harry? Do you really want to kill him like the Ministry of Magic said? How is that possible?" Hearing Harry's name, Sirius became even more agitated. "I swear to Merlin, I would rather die than let Harry suffer any harm. Let me introduce myself first. My last name is Halsey, Enterprise Halsey, former Auror of the American Magical Congress. Now I am the Hogwarts Safety Officer and Transfiguration Assistant Teacher." Looking at the crazy Sirius, Enterprise waved her wand to release a ball of light to illuminate the surroundings, then lifted the hood of her robe to reveal her face. "The reason why I came to you now is because after learning about your matter, I investigated your original case file and found a lot of suspicious things inside, so I wanted to ask you some questions." Head, even an Auror from America can see this. It seems that the British wizarding world is really getting worse and worse. After listening to Enterprise's self-introduction, Sirius shook his head with a bitter smile. Then he looked into Enterprise's eyes and said word by word, "If you want to ask, then I will tell you the story. Of course, it may be a little different from the story you heard outside." Chapter 259 End of discussion. So, in other words, you took it upon yourself to change the secret keeper, and then the secret keeper betrayed you and killed your friend. As a result, during the chase, you thought you had killed that traitor, so you went to prison to atone for your sins, and now you find out that the traitor is out to hunt him down. Is that right? After listening to Sirius's account, Enterprise quickly sorted out the relationship and said, "And now, for you, the biggest problem is that most people don't know that you changed the secret keeper, so now in everyone's eyes, you are a traitor and can't do anything." "That's right, that's exactly it." Sirius stared at Enterprise with wide eyes and roared in a low voice, "If you can help me bring that Weasley kid's pet rat here, I will be eternally grateful to you. You know, I am now the last heir of the Black family, so if you are willing to help me with this matter, I am willing to give you half of the family's wealth as a reward." It seems that as a member of a pure-blood family, Sirius unconsciously still picked up many pure-blood habits. So even if his current state is not very good, he also knows to use benefits to lower Enterprise. "Sorry, I can't promise you on this point for the time being." After Sirius finished speaking, Enterprise shook his head gently and said, "Because I need to find a way to confirm that what you said is true. The traitor is Peter." After hearing Enterprise say this, Sirius immediately struggled, but before he could finish shouting, Enterprise petrified him there with a spell. "Listen to me, I used to be an Auror." Looking at Sirius, who could only move his eyes, Enterprise nodded with satisfaction, and then said, "So I won't believe anyone's statement before investigating. Of course, given that you are now wanted, once arrested, you may be directly executed without trial, so I don't plan to hand you over directly to the Ministry of Magic or even the Dementors. Miss Halsey, I have to say that you should be a good Auror. It's just that you are a bit neurotic like Moody," Sirius said in a hoarse voice after Enterprise released the restrictions on Sirius. "Since you don't plan to send me directly to those damn Dementors, then shouldn't you let me go now?" "No, of course I won't let you go." Enterprise shook his head again. "The first thing you said when you opened your eyes was Harry, and if you really rushed into the school and killed Harry, then my mistake would be too great. I am Harry's godfather. How could I?" After hearing Enterprise say this, Sirius roared again, but Enterprise just raised his hand and lifted his wand, and he immediately quieted down. Learning to be quiet is a good thing. Enterprise smiled and then said, "So for the next period of time, I need to keep an eye on you to ensure that the situation is under control. Of course, this may be a bit unfair to you." So 5 minutes later, Enterprise appeared at the door of Anti-Strike's shop with Sirius, in his animagus form, in a magic cage. Unlike the previous black dog, Enterprise used a bunch of Muggle dice to dye Sirius into a husky. "Remember, your hind leg is injured now and you can't move," Enterprise said to Sirius in the cage, whose hind leg was wrapped in a bandage. "That lady boss is a good person, so they should be willing to take you in." Because she had communicated through the Admiral network before, she quickly placed Sirius, who was in a cage, in the warehouse of Anti-Strike's restaurant, and then hurried back to Hogwarts Castle. "How is it? Did you find anything outside the castle?" As soon as Enterprise entered the castle, Professor McGonagall walked down the grand staircase and asked, "A little bit." Enterprise took out a piece of torn cloth the size of a palm that he had just torn from Sirius's tattered robe and said, "This is what I found on a branch on the road to Hogsmeade." After handing over the only trophy he might have tonight to Professor McGonagall, Enterprise joined the patrol team composed of teachers and began patrolling the castle according to Professor Dumbledore's order. The professors not only had to search the entire castle, but also had to enter the Great Hall every hour to patrol and confirm that the students were safe and sound. "I have already taken care of everything." When passing by Professor Trelawney in a hurry from the corridor on the 3rd floor, Enterprise said to Hugo through the Admiral network, "Sirius has been placed in Anti-Strike's shop. I believe Anti-Strike and the others should be able to keep an eye on him. As for Peter, I think now is the time to find a chance to catch him." After learning that the scheduled plan for tonight had been completed, Hugo quickly closed his eyes and fell asleep amidst the prompt sound of obtaining 3 fate points. And early the next morning, he learned about some other things that happened last night. It turned out that at around 3 a.m., Hogwarts Castle had completed all the search work. Whether it was everyone's search or the piece of clothing fragment found by Enterprise, it showed that Sirius had left the castle. It's just that when the professors finally met to summarize, Snape always vaguely believed that Lupin helped Sirius sneak into the castle, but Dumbledore did not agree with this accusation. The Dementors stationed outside yesterday actually planned to come in, on the way to the classroom, Enterprise said through the Admiral network. Fortunately, Headmaster Dumbledore refused. Any normal headmaster would refuse this. Hugo walked through a group of chattering Hufflepuffs and then said, "That kind of monster has too much influence on ordinary people. No one would bet the future of the entire British wizarding world on this thing." In the next few days, the content of the school's gossip was basically unified by the topic of how Sirius entered the castle, and in this information dissemination, various guesses became more and more bizarre. Things like apparating in, flying in, or crawling in through some kind of disguise are all considered conventional guesses. Ideas similar to Hufflepuff's Hannah Abbott's suggestion that Black could transform into a flowering shrub also emerged one after another, but soon, another message circulated in the castle. That is, the Slytherin team changed the Quidditch match order on the grounds of Malfoy's rib injury. Malfoy's little injury last time doesn't need such a long recovery time at all. In the library, Harry lowered his voice and said to Hugo, Hermione, and Veneto sitting in front of him in a low voice, "He's just pretending." "You're right." After looking around to confirm that Mrs. Pants was not there, Veneto said with a helpless expression, "But we can't do anything about him on this point. According to the records I found, the Slytherin Quidditch team is very good at using all kinds of off-court tricks to enhance their advantages. At least 5 or 6 years ago, their previous team also had members who deliberately drank the wrong potion and then avoided playing in bad weather. Is it necessary to use such dirty tricks in school competitions?" Hermione put down her book and said with some incomprehension, "This kind of competition is just to compete for honor, and obtaining honor through such means should not be considered honor. This is only the case for us, but it is not the case for Slytherin." Hugo also joined the discussion. "They care more about the result of things. They don't care much about the process of achieving the result." After complaining about Slytherin's shamelessness for a few words, Harry seemed to suddenly think of something and said, "By the way, if you have time, you can help me find Ron's rat, Scabbers. I know this rat. I heard that it was also passed on to him by Ron's brother." After hearing the news about Peter, Veneto pretended to ask casually, "What happened to that rat?" Chapter 260 Snape in Chapter X27, S-Class in Broomstick. Why did Peter disappear at this time? On the way back to the common room after finishing his homework, Hugo asked Enterprise and the others through the Admiral network. Maybe Sirius Black scared him by slashing the Gryffindor common room door with a knife on Halloween night, Enterprise said after thinking for a moment. It's normal for the other party to run away ahead of schedule. Yes, but it's much more difficult to find him now, Hugo sighed. After all, it's too difficult to find a rat in such a large castle. Looking at the suddenly increased destiny points, Hugo really couldn't be happy at all. Although he knew that it was normal for Peter to be timid and for such a change to occur, it clearly affected the next step of the plan. On the day of the almost full moon, there was a defense against the dark arts class for Ravenclaw, so when Hugo and the others walked into the classroom, they found Professor Snape standing on the podium. "Your Professor Lupin did not leave any records about teaching, so I need to know what exactly you have learned this semester." After the class bell rang, Snape's first sentence was a subtle jab at Lupin. "Miss Granger, please briefly explain what you have learned in class before." After scanning the classroom with a slightly dangerous gaze, Snape pointed to Hermione, who was the first to raise her hand. "Sir, we have learned about boggarts, redcaps, kappas, and grindylows." Hermione stood up and said quickly, "We were just about to start learning some more dangerous." "All right, sit down." Perhaps because Hermione was in Ravenclaw, Snape's attitude towards Hermione was much better than in the original text, but he would not let Lupin off the hook. "We can see from this list that your Professor Lupin's teaching completely lacks organization and his demands on you are too low. At least I think first-year students should be able to deal with redcaps and grindylows, so today we are going to learn." Professor Snape quickly flipped through the textbook on the podium, while the Ravenclaw students below exchanged glances. To be fair, Lupin's teaching level was very good. It's just that Ravenclaw students are not as impulsive as Gryffindor, so no one stood up to question Snape's words. Now soon, Snape flipped to the last chapter of the textbook, then the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, revealing a sneer, and said, "Today's topic is werewolves." In an instant, both the Ravenclaw students and the Slytherin students showed surprised expressions. Snape's words when he entered the classroom made everyone realize that he would definitely not follow Lupin's teaching progress, but no one could have imagined that he could jump so far in progress. Now turn your textbooks to page 394. Snape frowned when he found that few people were moving, and then raised his voice. All of you. Move now, don't take your personal grudges out on the students, Hermione said softly in a voice that only Hugo next to her could hear. But having said that, she still turned to the last page of the textbook like the other students and wisely remained silent. Very good. After everyone turned to the last page of the textbook according to his request, Snape showed a smile that was uglier than crying, and then asked, "All right, now tell me how to distinguish between a werewolf and a real wolf." Seeing only 7 or 8 Ravenclaws raise their hands, Snape first glared at the Slytherins with a displeased expression, and then pointed to Veneto and said, "You answer this question. There are several differences between werewolves and real wolves." The snout of a werewolf, as Veneto had already memorized all these books, she quickly stood up and answered the differences between the two one by one. Correct. 5 points to Ravenclaw. After hearing Veneto's standard answer, Snape reluctantly added points to Veneto, and then asked, "Then how do you kill a werewolf? Just find a stone larger than a fist or turn something at hand into a long metal stick and fight it in close combat." Veneto replied subconsciously. A burst of laughter immediately came from the classroom. Everyone present remembered how Veneto killed a giant troll in close combat when she was in the first grade compared to the offensive magic that third-year students have mastered, which is obviously insufficient. Everyone thinks that Veneto with an iron rod is probably more dangerous than a werewolf. Sit down, Miss Veneto. After taking 2 deep breaths, Snape returned to his cold tone and said, "In my class, I need to teach you precise, operable knowledge, not some irreproducible individual cases, so in the following time, everyone sat quietly in their seats, taking notes on werewolves according to the textbook, while Snape walked back and forth between the desks, checking the studies they had completed during Professor Lupin's teaching. Of course, Snape did not stop talking during this process, but kept picking on the knowledge that Lupin had taught before. At the same time, he devalued the knowledge that Lupin had previously imparted. Almost all the students in the classroom could see that Professor Snape should have some personal grudges with Lupin, so many students from wizarding families thought about going back and asking their parents what happened back then. In the oppressive atmosphere, the class bell finally rang, but Snape did not let everyone leave as usual. "Everyone write an essay for me on how to identify and kill werewolves. I require you to fill 2 rolls of parchment on this topic and hand it in on Monday morning." Frankly speaking, I didn't expect you to be so behind in this class, so I'm going to suggest to the headmaster that someone should take good care of this class. Personal grudges are personal grudges, but it's too bad to bring this kind of emotion into the classroom, Hermione said worriedly after class. "I really hope Professor Lupin can come back soon." Just as everyone walked into the common room complaining, they suddenly found that everyone in the common room was gathered around the coffee table, wondering what they were looking at. What happened? Looking at Marietta and Cho Chang standing on the periphery of the crowd, Hugo stepped forward and asked, "Ah, you're here?" Turning her head and seeing Hugo and the others, Cho Chang became excited all of a sudden. Then she said to Veneto, "Veneto, someone sent you a broom?" "A broom?" Veneto walked to the front along the gap in the crowd in a daze, and saw a beautiful mahogany box with silver edges inlaid on all 8 corners on the table, with the words Nimbus 3 Racing Broom, Trial Production Version, written on it. "This should be a gift from my sister's friend. She is an American wizard and an alchemist. Recently, she said she wanted to create a new broom brand, so it seems that a sample has been made." After tearing open the envelope that came with the package, Hugo realized that the letter was written from Massachusetts. The content above was also very simple, just knowing that a friend's sister was a member of the school's Quidditch team, so she specially sent a new broom for her to test. Chapter 261 Cancole and Chapter X27, S New Broom. I've heard about that. For example, the Firebolt that just came out this summer already had a batch of experimental samples released to the market around Christmas last year. Zhang Chu, a longtime Quidditch fan, muttered quietly, "The Touchel Tornado Seeker once used a trial version of the Firebolt and, with overwhelming advantage in a match against the Holyhead Harpies, snatched the Golden Snitch right in front of the Holyhead Harpies Seeker." Because of the whispers among a few experienced players, everyone's attention was drawn over. So, with everyone's encouragement, Veneto carefully used the key attached to the box lid to unlock the box. After opening the lid, a beautiful, gleaming flying broomstick appeared before everyone's eyes. Seeing this, Veneto took the broomstick out of the box and gently released her hand. It hovered in midair, without any support, at just the right height for her to mount. Her eyes traveled from the golden anchor mark at the very top of the flying broomstick all the way down to the completely smooth, streamlined tip. "There's an instruction manual here." Hugo stepped forward and took a piece of parchment from the box. Then, under everyone's expectant gaze, he began to read. "The Daydream 3 flying broomstick adopts the most advanced modern manufacturing technology. Its handle is exquisitely crafted from North American alder wood, streamlined and beautiful, and treated with a strong polishing agent, with hand-carved emblems. Each bristle at the tail of the product has been carefully selected to ensure perfect streamlining. Therefore, this product has achieved an unprecedented perfect combination of balance and precision. According to testing, the Daydream 3 flying broomstick accelerates to 160 miles per hour in just 8.6 seconds and has built-in braking facilities and powerful dark magic defense capabilities to match the power." After reading the instruction manual, Hugo subconsciously raised his eyebrows. Obviously, the shipgirl's positioning of this flying broomstick was as a top-tier professional broom, so even the promotional language was imitating the firebolt. But thinking about it, this broom itself is not a cheap product in terms of cost, and it incorporates a series of top-notch alchemical techniques, so naturally it is more suitable to take a professional route. Accelerates to 160 miles per hour in just 8.6 seconds, Ravenclaw Quidditch Captain Davis exclaimed. "If that's true, then it means this broom is even better than the firebolt." After hearing Davis say this, everyone chattered even more excitedly. So, that afternoon during Quidditch practice, almost one-third of the Ravenclaw students came to the training grounds, wanting to see this new broom because the tag on the broom said it was a trial product. Veneto used the excuse that she needed to collect more data and let the Ravenclaw team members try out the new broom one by one, while she sat in her seat and slacked off. However, in everyone's eyes, this became Veneto's generosity, a very generous act of being willing to share her happiness with everyone, which greatly boosted her popularity. "Fantastic, this broom is fantastic," Zhang Qiu, the first to try it, said with an excited face after jumping off the broom. "This is the best handling broom I've ever seen. It turns with just a very light touch, as if obeying my thoughts rather than my actions, and from a speed perspective, this broom is impeccable. I've never flown across the field at such a speed. I even saw everything on the ground become blurry just now." Zhang Qiu's comments immediately attracted everyone present, so other team members took turns to experience the new broom. And everyone who came down from the broom invariably praised it. In addition to the team members, several students who had tried other brooms before also felt the new broom. Although no one present had ridden a firebolt, those who had experienced the Nimbus series believed that this broom had a generational difference compared to the Nimbus 2001. After everyone had tried the broom, Veneto announced that because she was only a substitute and there was only one broom, she had decided to temporarily lend the broom to Seeker Zhang Qiu. This was actually Massachusetts' suggestion, because she believed that since this broom called Daydream 3 was released later than the firebolt, it was necessary to take a series of marketing measures to smooth out the time gap with the main competitor. So, in addition to the broom sent to Venero, they had been looking for collaborators in the wizarding world everywhere since the summer. Hoping to promote the broom, and their efforts were not without results. At least several Quidditch teams, including the Holyhood Harpies, and several Quidditch national teams had incorporated the Daydream 3 broom into their equipment. Among them, the United States national team and the Irish national team, after more than a month of testing, clearly expressed their intention to purchase mass-produced Daydream 3 brooms. Of course, the Ravenclaws present did not know these things behind the scenes. But Veneto's willingness to lend the broom clearly boosted the morale of the Ravenclaw Quidditch team. Slytherin was not the only house that was tricked by switching the match order. Ravenclaw, who had originally trained to face Hufflepuff, was also tricked. Fortunately, Ravenclaw itself advocates playing with brains, so the losses were not too heavy with a pre-planned strategy. But even so, every team member was furious. "We must teach Slytherin a lesson this time," Zhang Qiu, who usually seemed a little introverted, said to everyone while holding the Daydream 3. "Let them know that these little tricks are useless against us." Soon, the first match of the year arrived. After waking up in bed that morning, Hugo heard the rumbling of thunder in the sky, the sound of the wind hitting the castle walls, and the sound of trees breaking in the distant Forbidden Forest. And when he met up with Hermione and Veneto to go to the Great Hall for dinner, he noticed that this storm was the biggest he had seen in more than 2 years at Hogwarts. Because the weather was too dark, the candles and torches that were originally only lit at night were all burning quietly. From time to time, they could hear the gloating laughter of the Slytherin students. "You're here early today," perhaps because he arrived relatively early. There were not many people in the Great Hall. So Hugo saw Harry eating at the table at the first moment and went up to say hello. Morning. Harry waved his hand weakly. Obviously, today's weather was really too bad, which made him worry about the upcoming game. Oh, you might need this. After chatting for a few minutes, Hermione suddenly seemed to remember something, pulled out her wand, and said to Harry, "Give me your glasses." Harry immediately took off his glasses and handed them to Hermione. Hermione tapped Harry's glasses lightly with her wand and said, "Waterproof and damp-proof." In an instant, a magical force enveloped the glasses. "It's raining today, and you might not be able to find your target while wearing glasses. Now, the water won't interfere with your glasses," Hermione said, handing the glasses back. "You're so thoughtful." "Thank you," Harry thanked her from the bottom of his heart. To be honest, even he, who wears glasses, hadn't thought about what would happen in this kind of weather. After chatting for a few more sentences, the Gryffindor team members also walked in from the entrance of the Great Hall one after another. So Hugo and the others said goodbye to Harry and returned to their seats. "I have never seen such despicable and shameless people in the world." After sitting down in her seat, looking at Malfoy at the Slytherin table boasting that if his ribs were fine, he could beat the other teams to a pulp, Hermione muttered with a displeased expression, "There will always be imperfect places in this world." Hugo shrugged and said, "And the greatest significance of the existence of these trash in the world is to set off the beauty of the world." Chapter 262 Dementor Attack. Although the weather this year was unexpectedly terrible, the game would not be cancelled due to minor issues like thunderstorms. So, a few minutes after Hugo and the others braved the wind and rain to reach the stands, the game began with a whistle. Compared to previous games, today's match had an added sense of tragedy. Even the spectators in the stands felt cold and wet, so one could only imagine the conditions for the players flying in the sky. "I suddenly think coming here today was a mistake," Hermione said, huddled together with Hugo, watching the black shadows flying in the storm. "This darn weather makes it impossible to hear the commentary or see the game clearly. In this situation, all we can do is stand here and get blown and rained on." This was an unprecedented Quidditch duel, with icy rain pouring down. Amidst the howling wind, everyone, including the players on both teams, hoped the game would end quickly. However, ending the game wasn't so simple, because in this weather, even seeing people clearly was quite difficult, let alone the fast-flying, small golden snitch. As a result, the game naturally couldn't end. It must be said that Gryffindor's captain, Wood, had a point in making the team train in the wind and rain. At least in this weather, Gryffindor's momentum seemed stronger, and they scored more goals as thunder rumbled. Streaks of jagged lightning appeared in the sky. Although Wizards' brooms now had a series of lightning protection spells, the numbness and sluggishness after being struck by lightning were still unavoidable. A Hufflepuff chaser was struck by lightning while raising his bat to hit the quaffle. Although he wasn't injured thanks to the magic's protection, the momentary paralysis caused him to lose control and fall from his broom. Fortunately, Madam Hooch and a senior volunteer quickly cast a cushioning charm, allowing him to land safely on the grass below the field. Harry spotted the golden snitch, just as Hugo was paying attention to the rescue of the fallen player at the edge of the field. Hermione suddenly grabbed Hugo's arm and shouted. Hugo looked up and saw Harry maneuvering his broom to climb rapidly, reaching out with one hand, while Cedric followed closely behind him. "The game is finally..." Hugo's words were cut short as he noticed a change in his surroundings. The environment suddenly became quiet. The wind was still as strong as before, but it forgot to roar, as if someone had turned off the sound. Then, the surrounding temperature plummeted, like a bucket of ice water poured from head to toe. Hugo looked up and saw at least 100 Dementors floating overhead. Some of them raised their heads to look at the players flying on the field, while others lowered their heads to deeply inhale the emotions of the excited audience below. As they inhaled, a layer of frost began to condense on the ground. Suddenly, a burst of exclamation erupted from the stands as Harry fell straight off his broom. Seeing this, Cedric instinctively tried to grab Harry, but he was a half-beat too late due to the heavy rain and cold weather. Fortunately, Professor Dumbledore had already taken out his old wand and cast several spells at Harry, greatly slowing his descent. Expecto Patronum. At this moment, Hugo also drew his wand and subconsciously cast the spell he had been practicing recently. A silver octopus flew from the tip of his wand and hovered in the air because the power of this corporeal patronus bought everyone time. Several Ravenclaw upperclassmen also released their own corporeal patron uses at the same time. Headmaster Dumbledore also released a giant phoenix patronus and led several patron uses on the field in a lap around the stadium, completely driving the Dementors out of the Quidditch pitch. After completing all of this, Hugo and the others quickly ran down the stands, rushed onto the field, and arrived at Harry's side. They found that Harry had not suffered any injuries thanks to the headmaster's magic. After a brief examination, Headmaster Dumbledore used his wand to guide Harry onto a stretcher and strode towards the castle, with Harry's stretcher floating closely behind. On the way to the castle with the headmaster, Hugo noticed that he had gained 1.5 fate points. This was partly because of the corporeal patronus he had just cast, and partly because the game had been announced as postponed because Harry's movements were faster this time than in the original story. Cedric was still some distance away from the golden snitch when Harry fell. After he instinctively tried to grab Harry without success, the golden snitch disappeared without a trace. In light of the major problem that had occurred during the game, Madam Hooch simply blew her whistle and announced that today's game was suspended, and the two teams would reschedule at a later time. Although Harry was not physically injured, being surrounded by more than 100 Dementors had clearly damaged his soul to some extent, resulting in Madame Pomfrey requiring him to stay in the hospital for 3 days. So, after class the next day, Hugo, Hermione, and Veneto brought some candies and snacks they had bought in Hogsmeade to visit Harry in the hospital. "Thank you for coming to see me." Harry, wearing a hospital gown and reclining on the bed, was not in good spirits. Although he didn't lose the game this time, he was still very unlucky to have lost his Nimbus 2000. "Get well soon." After Hermione placed the candies on Harry's bedside, Hugo offered his wishes and looked at the pile of Nimbus 2000 wreckage beside Harry. Contrary to what he had imagined, the wreckage of the Nimbus 2000 had not become fragments, but was broken into 3 sections, with some damage to the branches. "What did your broom hit this time?" Looking at the fragments broken into 3 sections, Hugo asked curiously. "The broomsticks that have been magically treated are almost as hard as steel. If it had just fallen from the sky to the ground, it shouldn't be like this. The giant squid in the Black Lake did it," Harry said helplessly. "The giant squid was taking a breather on the surface of the lake during the storm, and my broom poked it in the head." "That's unlucky." Hugo shook his head helplessly. It seemed that even though the wind direction was different from before, Harry's broom still hadn't survived this year. After lamenting Harry's unlucky broom for a second, Hugo subconsciously reached out, picked up the broken front end of the broomstick, took out his wand, and examined it. Soon, he discovered something interesting. "Harry, your broom is actually worth saving." After finishing the examination, Hugo told Harry a piece of news that was both good and bad. However, because the main body has been damaged, even if it is repaired, it will no longer be able to perform intense activities like Quidditch. But you can use it as a household broom like cornflour. So, when leaving the school hospital, Hugo took away the wreckage of the Nimbus 2030 galleons. According to Harry, it would be better if the Nimbus 2000 could accompany him in another form than it was now. "This is a good opportunity to test my alchemy skills." After going out, Hugo said to Hermione, "If everything goes well, I can return the repaired broom to him next weekend." Chapter 263 Fluffy Little Problem. Malfoy was extremely excited because Harry had fallen from the sky. He would seize every opportunity to mimic Harry's fall from his broomstick with manic energy, and would also occasionally wear a hood to imitate a Dementor. However, apart from a few Slytherin students, not many people found Malfoy's current behavior amusing. Instead, they thought he seemed to have injured his brain after a fall because the full moon had passed. Professor Lupin returned to teaching. He certainly looked ill. His old robes hung even more loosely on him, and there were dark shadows under his eyes. As soon as he entered, Professor Lupin gave everyone a gift. He announced that the essay on werewolves that Snape had assigned last time was no longer required. "Oh, no," Hermione said, looking disappointed. "I've already finished it." The lesson was enjoyable. Professor Lupin brought in a glass tank containing a hinkapunk, a one-legged creature that looked like wisps of smoke, very fragile, and didn't seem to want to hurt anyone. "It lures travelers into bogs," Professor Lupin said, as the students took notes. "Notice the lantern dangling from its front leg? It skips ahead, people follow the light, and then, the hinkapunk scraped its head against the glass, making a terrible screeching sound after the bell rang." Professor Lupin packed up his things and headed towards his office, only to be stopped by Halsey in a corridor. "Professor Lupin, you don't look well," Halsey said earnestly, scrutinizing Professor Lupin's face. "Have you seen Madame Pomfrey yet?" "Thank you for your concern, Professor Halsey." Hearing Halsey's sincere greeting, a smile appeared on Lupin's face, his first of the day, but it quickly faded. "Regarding your monthly condition, I hope we can have a proper chat," Halsey said, emphasizing the word condition. After all, my current job is to ensure the safety of the young wizards, so I must do some things I don't want to do. Very well, my office is empty now, we can talk there. For a moment, Lupin wanted to deny it. But he realized that the young woman before him was a former elite Auror from the Magical Congress of the United States of America, and he abandoned the idea in silence. The two quickly arrived at Lupin's office and sat down on opposite sides of the desk. Unlike Lockhart's office last year, which was full of his own photos, Lupin's office mainly contained various teaching aids needed for his lessons. For example, there were several tanks and cages, each housing different kinds of dark creatures. When did you find out I was a werewolf? Realizing that he couldn't hide it, Lupin instead became more open, so he asked directly as soon as they sat down. In many places, Halsey said, sitting in the chair. Actually, I've been watching you since you started the term because your graduation grades were excellent, but your current state of destitution is abnormal. So, to avoid putting someone with ulterior motives into the school and posing a threat to the school or the students, I started collecting information about you little by little through various means. I understand. Hearing Halsey say this, Lupin realized how Halsey had figured out his identity after all. In the dozen years since graduation, he had worked in many places, and there were always moments of negligence. If someone wanted to collect evidence, it would be easy to find out his werewolf identity. If you think I'm not suitable to work here, then I can. Lupin was a good person in every sense of the word, so at this moment, he thought of consciously leaving the school. No, I can keep this a secret for you and even cover for you. After all, you're doing a good job as the defense against the dark arts professor, Halsey said, shaking her head. But I hope you can answer a few questions truthfully. Of course, please ask. Lupin looked at Halsey earnestly. He didn't dislike Halsey's attitude. After all, compared to those who hated werewolves, he didn't see any prejudice against werewolves on Halsey's face. Don't be nervous, just 2 questions. Halsey used her wand to direct the teapot on the side to pour tea for both of them, and then said, first, does the headmaster know you're a werewolf? Second, have you ever intentionally hurt anyone before? The headmaster knows I'm a werewolf. Actually, I've been a werewolf since I was very young. Thanks to Headmaster Dumbledore for giving me the opportunity to come here to study. Hearing Halsey's question, Lupin breathed a sigh of relief and answered, as for hurting people, I only accidentally almost hurt Professor Snape when I transformed into a werewolf at school. Other than that, I have never actively attacked anyone. After saying this, Lupin gripped his teacup and stared nervously at Halsey. If that's the case, I can help you conceal your identity, and even cover for you. Lupin felt that those 10-odd seconds were very long. Fortunately, Halsey finally spoke when he was almost unable to hold on. Because I believe Professor Dumbledore's judgment, he wouldn't put a dangerous person into the school and let him have close contact with the students, or even give him the opportunity to harm the students. However, I also have a request here. Looking at Lupin, who was slightly relaxed, Halsey added with a straight face. From now on the night of the full moon, I will stay next door to your office to avoid any accidents. Of course, that's a good thing. It's just that it might be too much trouble for you. When Lupin heard that Halsey was going to make a request, he felt his heart almost jump into his throat. Fortunately, Halsey finally made a request that he thought was very reasonable. After all, Lupin didn't want to hurt anyone either, so apart from Wolfsbane potion, having someone willing to watch at the door to prevent danger was actually an important safeguard for him. It's okay to keep a qualified defense against the dark arts professor. I don't mind working a little harder. Halsey smiled, then picked up her teacup and drank, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly relaxed. Oh, right, I just remembered something, Halsey said suddenly, raising her head after taking a few sips of tea. These Dementors are really terrible this year, so I think you should teach the students how to deal with those guys. It might be difficult to get permission from the Ministry of Magic, Lupin said, shrugging. After all, the Dementors are now under the direct control of the Ministry of Magic, and teaching people how to fight these monsters on a large scale might be a procedural problem. I know, after all, I've worked in such departments, Halsey said with a smile. But we have other ways to get around these restrictions, such as teaching a small group of students first, and then teaching everyone through a mentoring system. Alright, I'll try my best to pass on this knowledge to everyone, Lupin said after thinking for a few minutes. Also, you're actually more suitable for this course than I am. Me? Forget it, I don't have the courage to face the curse on this course, Halsey said, shaking her head and smiling. That's why I admire you professors. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264 New Product Launch. The most direct result of the conversation between Enterprise and Lupin was that Lupin held a small extracurricular class on defense against the dark arts, but other than a few Gryffindors, no one signed up for this interest group. At the end of November, the Ravenclaw team and the Slytherin team started their first match. Because of Venato's presence, the Slytherin team members had to put away those dirty tricks beforehand to avoid triggering a counterattack from Ravenclaw in the second year. Some Slytherin students, not believing in evil, tried to ambush Venato in the corridor, but Venato beat all 5 of them to the ground, and then piled these boys up in the corridor, making them a laughingstock for a long time. In fact, if purely compared in terms of skill, the Slytherin Quidditch team is actually slightly stronger than the Ravenclaw team, especially this year, after the old Ravenclaw captain and several main players withdrew from the team due to graduation or exams, excluding Venato's ability to shoot down opponents on the field. Ravenclaw's disadvantage is much more obvious than in previous years, but in the match at the end of November, the Ravenclaw team still won. This was mainly because Quidditch does not restrict each team's equipment, and catching the golden snitch provides an absolute advantage. So, throughout the match, even though Cho Chang's skill as a seeker was a little worse than Malfoy's, the Nimbus 3 was clearly superior in performance to the Nimbus 2001. As a result, even though Malfoy was indeed the first to spot the golden snitch in the match, Cho Chang still caught the golden snitch later, and the biggest direct consequence of this match was that after the match, Massachusetts received a large number of inquiries from the UK, including several Quidditch clubs. After all, the Quidditch matches at Hogwarts are not completely closed off. Sometimes, some people from outside the school are also allowed to watch the matches from the stands, so naturally some people realized the advantage of the Nimbus 3 broom that Cho Chang was riding. There's good news, we may be able to release our new broom a week early. The day after the match, Hugo received a message from Massachusetts through the Admiralty network, because a karst-style underground cave was found at the location originally planned for the construction of the Earth's core furnace. It saved a lot of site construction time, and the progress of the furnace construction is also much earlier than planned. That's a good thing. It means we can get our goods into the Christmas shopping season. Hugo replied, by the way, how is your stock level? I remember that several racing brooms were eliminated in the past because of insufficient production. Don't worry, we are industrializing production, Massachusetts said confidently, especially after the production of goblin silver is no longer restricted. Our current production efficiency is even faster than the Nimbus series. As for the Firebolt, it is far from our opponent in terms of distribution speed. If that's the case, that's good. After receiving Massachusetts' affirmative answer, a smile appeared on Hugo's face. Although the sales volume of this top-notch product is not large, the profit is very considerable, and it can drive a large industrial chain. More importantly, the definition of top-notch products means that the market capacity of this thing itself is limited. So, only if our production speed is fast enough can we occupy this market. That's not a big problem, because except for a few privately customized products made by traditional workshops, the only one that can compete with us is the Firebolt, Massachusetts explained. But because the Firebolt uses a lot of goblin silver as its core structure, the delivery of silver is a problem due to the goblins' penchant for jacking up prices in their artisan spirit. The output is very unstable. After learning that everything was ready for the launch of the Nimbus 3, Hugo seemed very excited, because these industries were very important to him. In addition to bringing him a lot of wealth, the main benefit was that he could gather more manpower with the expansion of the industries of Hood and the others in recent years. They now provide enough jobs for at least half of the unemployed Muggle-born or half-blood wizards in the UK, and then organize these people. Although these people have not been organized for a long time, the ship girls are confident enough to produce an organization that is united enough internally and has a certain combat capability. In a year or two after receiving these good news, Hugo felt a lot of happiness in his heart, and this also offset a lot of the oppressive feeling brought about by the recent bad weather. After all, since October, the wind and rain in Hogwarts had not stopped much, and it continued until December before there were some signs of gradually stopping. However, relative to before, there was one piece of good news during this period. That was that the Dementors no longer dared to approach the school campus. This was partly because Headmaster Dumbledore's anger really scared them, and partly because the holler letters that the parents sent to fudge like raindrops forced the Ministry of Magic to take more measures to restrict these hateful monsters 2 weeks before the end of the semester, the sky suddenly cleared, presenting a dazzling eggshell white, and the muddy ground was covered with a layer of shining frost one morning inside the castle. There was a Christmas atmosphere everywhere. Charms teacher Professor Flitwick had decorated his classroom with shimmering light sources, which were actually real little fairies constantly fluttering their wings. The students were happily discussing their holiday plans. This Christmas, Dad said he would take the whole family skiing in France. After receiving a letter from home, Hermione happily waved a letter in her hand and said to Hugo, "If I'm not mistaken, we're going to a famous ski resort in the Alps. I saw it on TV before. I heard it's a very beautiful place, a vacation in France." "That is indeed good news," Hugo said after looking at the letter. "After all, the Alps are one of the most famous ski resorts in Europe. And it just so happens that he can go there to summon some French ship girls in the last week before the holiday. Everyone can go to Hogsmeade once again. For most third-year students except Harry, this is something that makes everyone happy. Remember, when we go to Hogsmeade tomorrow, we should buy more Fizzing Whiz-Bees." "Mom and Dad really like this snack," Hermione whispered to Hugo while reading a book in the library the night before. "Don't worry, I'll remember." Hugo put down a book on alchemy in his hand and said, since participating in the alchemy competition last time, he now has the right to borrow alchemy books from the restricted section at any time. But he can't take them out of here, so now, whenever he has free time, Hugo comes to the library to borrow these precious books that are regarded as treasures by some families outside. On Saturday morning, because Veneto needed to go to the anti-magic restaurant with Firefly to deal with some matters, Hugo and Hermione left Hogwarts early in the morning in the snow, and as they passed through the entrance hall, they saw Harry standing pitifully on the steps, watching the students leaving the castle one after another to go to Hogsmeade. Chapter 265 Enterprise Discovery. Maybe Harry will be able to go to Hogsmeade next year. After greeting Harry, Hugo and Hermione crunched through the snow towards Hogsmeade. On the way, Hermione expressed her sympathy for Harry. "According to the handbook I checked before, the headmaster and deputy headmaster of the school actually have the right to sign permission slips for students who lack immediate family. It's just that Professor Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall are unwilling to take risks this year because of the dangers outside. In reality, Hogwarts policies in this area are not as strict as everyone imagines. Otherwise, Sirius Black, a recognized wanted criminal, would definitely not have his signature on the form be valid." Chatting along the way, Hugo and Hermione quickly arrived at Hogsmeade. The first stop here was naturally Honeydukes. In addition to bringing gifts for their parents, Hugo also needed to send Christmas gifts to his ship girls: rum-flavored chocolate, blood-flavored lollipops. "Hugo, are you sure you didn't buy the wrong things?" Seeing the large bag Hugo was carrying, Hermione looked puzzled. "No problem, this is mainly for my friends." After paying the bill, Hugo explained to his sister on the way to the Owl post office. "You know, I met some friends from foreign countries in the last match." Watching Hugo write addresses in Northern Europe, Germany, the United States, and even Japan on the mailing slips, Hermione, who was still a little suspicious, dispelled her doubts. After paying all the postage, the two walked into the snowy outdoors again. Hogsmeade looked like a Christmas card. The small cottages and shops were covered with a layer of crisp snow, and holly wreaths hung on the doors of each house, with strings of enchanted candles hanging from the trees. "Hugo, Hermione, you guys are here quite early today." Just as the Granger siblings were wondering where to go to warm up, a female voice suddenly came from behind. Turning around, Hugo saw Enterprise running through the snow in a black cloak embroidered with gold trim, carrying a small handbag. "Hall, Enterprise, good morning." After recognizing Enterprise, Hermione greeted her and then looked at the handbag in Enterprise's hand. "I just bought some fire whiskey from the Hogshead pub." Noticing that Hermione and Hugo were focusing on her bag, Enterprise opened it to show them inside the cloth bag were 2 gray bottles, the dust on them giving the impression that they hadn't been cleaned for at least 10 years. Even after Enterprise opened the bag, a puff of dust could be seen. "Ah, sorry." Seeing this, Enterprise quickly closed the bag and said, "That place does have a lot of aged wine, but it's a bit lacking in hygiene." Because of Aberforth's way of running things, the Hogshead pub was obviously dirty and chaotic. So it gradually became a remote place, which further attracted some illegal transactions. Obviously, illegal merchants like Mundungus Fletcher couldn't afford good wine. Therefore, the Hogshead pub naturally accumulated a batch of aged wine, And after discovering this, Enterprise naturally didn't miss this good opportunity to buy wine because of Enterprise's joining. The three of them simply went to the Three Broomsticks pub to get something to drink. As soon as they entered, they saw Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, Hagrid, and Minister of Magic Fudge sitting at the bar. "Let's go over there." Enterprise lowered her head slightly and pointed to an empty table at the back of the room. "Being with these senior faculty members makes me feel a little uncomfortable." Fortunately, there were a lot of people in the Three Broomsticks pub, and the light wasn't very bright, so Enterprise quickly led Hugo and Hermione around the bar to that table. Just as they arrived at the table, they saw Ron also walking over from the bar with 2 mugs of hot butterbeer, looking like he was going to sit at the empty table as well. Looks like butterbeer is indeed quite popular. Wait, no. After seeing Ron, Enterprise first joked, and then suddenly showed a vigilant expression as if she had thought of something. "What's wrong, Enterprise?" Seeing Enterprise suddenly put her hand on her wand, Hermione became nervous. While speaking, she also reached out and touched her own wand. "It's nothing." At this moment, Enterprise seemed to remember something and moved her hand away from her wand, then said to the Granger siblings standing beside her, "Let's just sit here." So Hugo and they sat down at Ron's table. After sitting down, just as Hermione and Hugo were about to go to the bar to buy some drinks, they saw Enterprise suddenly grab at the empty space next to her. "Harry, why did you run out at this time?" Enterprise bent down and asked softly. "It's not very safe for you outside right now, Professor Halsey." Just as Hermione hadn't realized what was happening, half of Harry's face appeared in the air. From the height of his face, it could be seen that he should be squatting and hiding under the table. "How did you find me?" The wet footprints on the floor, the marks on the seats, the 2 mugs of butterbeer in Ron's hand, and a strange empty table here. Enterprise shook her head and said, "The invisibility cloak is very powerful, but in my opinion, there are loopholes everywhere." "Sorry, Professor, this has nothing to do with Ron. I ran out on my own this time." Realizing that he had been discovered, Harry simply crawled out from under the table and said, "Don't worry, I'm not here to investigate this matter," Enterprise said with a smile. "After all, it's too inhumane to leave only you in the castle for the entire 3rd year, but I think you should also know about the current safety issues, so I'll sit here with you for a while, and then we'll go back to the castle together." At this moment, the professors and Fudge near the bar began to chat. From their conversation, Harry learned about his parents being betrayed by Sirius Black, and then returned to Hogwarts Castle with Enterprise, feeling distraught. "By the way, did you find your Scabbers?" After Harry and Enterprise left, Hugo looked at Ron and asked, "I heard Harry say before that your pet rat was lost." "No, Scabbers hasn't appeared since we rested in the Great Hall that night," Ron said, looking depressed as he took out his wand. "If I hadn't bought this new wand during the summer vacation, I might still have money to buy a new pet." "Aren't you going to look for your pet?" Hermione frowned and asked. Since raising Crookshanks, she felt that this kind of human-like pet had brought her too much joy, so she didn't understand why our Ron gave up looking for his pet. "This rat has been in my family for more than 10 years. My father found it in the vegetable garden in the yard. It looked quite well behaved at the time, so it was given to my brother as a pet, and then passed on to me." Ron explained the reason. "During the summer vacation, I also asked a pet expert from the pet store to help me check it. As a result, the expert told me that my rat was just a very ordinary field mouse, which can generally only live for about 3 years, and exceeding 7 years is considered very long-lived, considering that Scabbers has already lived for more than 10 years, and his condition hasn't been very good since returning from Egypt. I think he probably felt that his end was near and was afraid of making me sad, so he left my side." Obviously, without Crookshanks this year, Ron's thinking is significantly more rational than in the original text. So naturally, he has a different view on the disappearance of his pet rat. "Well, I hope Scabbers can live happily in the rat's paradise." Hugo patted Ron on the shoulder and said, "Just like you said before, leaving quietly like this may not be a bad thing for him who is suffering from illness." Chapter 266 Results. Because it was the last day before the holiday, the dinner at Hogwarts that night was very lavish. At the same time, everyone at the table wore smiles, immersed in the joy of going home for the holidays. As for Hugo, this trip to Hogsmeade earned him 1.5 fate points, a pre-Christmas gift that naturally made him feel very good on the Hogwarts Express. Every student seemed very lively. They excitedly discussed their holiday plans and took advantage of the last bit of time they could use magic to joke around to find some peace and quiet. Hugo and Hermione found a compartment at the end of the train and sat down. then chatted about the Christmas holidays. We're going to Brittany to meet one of my father's business partners, and then we're going to a ski resort near the Alps for a vacation, Hermione said with a frustrated look, holding a letter. A business vacation, after all. The other party is also coming on vacation with their family, so we naturally have to go with them, Hugo said, pointing to a line in the letter. And there's a good chance that their daughter is one of us. How did you figure that out? I don't think our parents or their parents would go around talking about something like that, Hermione said, looking at Hugo in surprise. Our father figured it out, Hugo said, pointing to the letter. His business partner said that both of his daughters are attending a famous international school on the French-Swiss border, but he never mentioned the specific name of the school, and our father now introduces us to outsiders in the same way. He'll say that we're studying at a boarding school in Scotland, but he also won't say the name of the school. So he's quite sensitive about this. In that case, this trip should be quite interesting. After Hugo's analysis, Hermione's face showed an expression of interest. Soon, the train pulled into King's Cross Station. Because Mr. and Mrs. Granger were both quite busy that day, they returned with Veneto and Firefly in Hood's car, going skiing in the Alps. That's a great trip, Hood said after chatting about Christmas plans. Our family plans to sunbathe on the Mediterranean coast. The winter in England is really too cold. That night, Hugo and the others naturally had a lavish dinner. After lying in bed, the ship girls took turns reporting their respective actions through the Admiral network. The most important information came from Stalingrad and the others. After years of fighting, they finally ended the war in the northwestern part of the Balkan Peninsula and reunited some of the fragmented areas. We will announce this news on Christmas. Stalingrad's tired but excited voice came from the Admiral network. Whether it's the Wizarding world or the Muggle world, we have successfully changed history and saved many people. More importantly, we now truly have our own port, the Soviet Union added at this time. In fact, we had already achieved this goal 3 months ago after the siege of Sarajevo ended. But the end of the war doesn't mean that everything we have to deal with is over, Dzerzhinsky added from the side. In these past few months, my work has been even busier than during the war, because there are too many unstable factors that need to be eliminated. Compared to direct conflicts on the battlefield, the work of eliminating the roots of war is more complex and dangerous. I alone have been assassinated 7 or 8 times during this period. Are you okay? Hugo asked nervously after hearing what the ship girl said. Of course I'm fine. Do you think a 7.62mm bullet, an anti-tank mine, or a drop of poison that can kill 10 people can cause any damage to a 17,500-ton cruiser? Dzerzhinsky said dismissively. Obviously, for the ship girls, those things that could kill people were not even toys. Instead, they were able to take advantage of such opportunities to uproot unstable factors. In addition to their actions in the Muggle world, the ship girls also completely controlled the local Ministry of Magic. Then, they used the local cheap labor and abundant natural resources to develop production, and with the ship girls' strict crackdown on various local dark magic forces and the conditional pardon of dark wizards, the number of dark wizards in the area has been declining sharply, allowing the Soviet Union and the others to gain a foothold in the Wizarding world. The reason for this situation is that the ship girls have strong combat power and a perfect organization, completely defeating the various dark wizard organizations rampant in the region and either capturing or killing those criminals under this high-pressure state. Those dark wizards had no choice but to choose to stay away from this area and retreat to Albania after many attempts to resist failed. Of course, the improvement of public security is also directly related to the ship girls' promotion of the local economy. At least after economic development, more jobs can be provided to local wizards, so that they do not have to resort to crime because of unemployment. Also, because of the large number of personnel replenishment, the ship girls successfully built a geocentric furnace in a cave in a mountain range in the Karst Plateau, which is indispensable for refining fairy silver and a series of magical alloys. And relying on the output of this geocentric furnace, the ship girls launched a variety of new magical products, and the Sky 3 broom was therefore able to successfully enter commercial mass production. During the pre-Christmas promotion, our new broom was a great success, Massachusetts, who was in charge of sales in this area, said. At least in the United States, we have gained 1/3 of the high-end broom market. However, because production has just gotten on track, there is a shortage in output. Therefore, our market share in Europe can only reach 1/10, but fortunately, several important Quidditch teams have chosen our brooms instead of firebolts. After the flames of war in the Balkan Peninsula were extinguished, the biggest benefit for Hugo was that he could finally reduce his investment in the region. Although it will be difficult for the region to have enough output in a short period of time, things are at least getting better. After resolving one concern, Hugo then focused his attention on the ship girls who had newly joined the group. As he had imagined before, the ship girls had extremely strong adaptability and were able to integrate into the local environment in a short period of time. For example, whether it was the German ship girls, the Nordic ship girls, or the Japanese ship girls, they had all successfully integrated into the local environment and found their place in the entire ship girl network. We have now initially established a trade network that is semi-independent of those built by pure-blood wizards, Hood, the main person in charge, concluded. This is very important to us. At least when facing a possible war. We can bypass those pure-blood wizards to mobilize various items. For the ship girls who were born for war, the materials in the wizarding world that are now controlled by the hypothetical enemy pure-blood wizards are obviously unacceptable, so they have been silently building their own logistics system, and now, this system is beginning to take shape. Chapter 267 Travel to Brittany. After discussing these serious matters, the ship girls chatted with Hugo about Christmas. The ship girls were very happy with the gifts Hugo gave them this year, so they also prepared some return gifts. Of course, the ship girls are still keeping the specific return gifts a secret, only saying that they will give Hugo a surprise the day before Christmas. The next 3 days were very peaceful. Hugo and Hermione spent almost all their time in the study doing some of their summer homework. 3 days later, the Granger family took a plane to Brest early in the morning. Brest is an important naval port on the Brittany Peninsula in northern France and a thriving city. After leaving the airport, they saw a middle-aged man in a gray suit standing by a cart to pick them up. "Welcome, welcome, Chris, and your wife and children." Seeing the Granger family, the middle-aged man immediately stepped forward and hugged Mr. Granger, then shook hands with the others one by one. "It's a pleasure to see you too, Jill," Mr. Granger said, introducing his friend and partner to his family. "This is Mr. Jill Prowett, my college classmate and partner. He is now an accountant and has helped us a lot in finance." "Just a little help," Jill said with a smile, then asked everyone to get in the car. Soon, the car drove out of the city and into the suburbs, finally entering a yard surrounded by hedges. "This is my little farm. We come here every year for vacation. We'll stay here today, and tomorrow afternoon we can go to the ski lodge in the Alps," Mr. Prowett introduced after getting out of the car. This is a common country farm in northern France, and it doesn't look very grand. But both the surrounding environment and the architecture of the manor itself make people feel very comfortable and relaxed. After entering the door, they first passed through the dining room. Then they went all the way up the wooden stairs. After a short walk, they stopped in front of the window at the end of the corridor. This is the countryside, so the overall conditions of the room may not be as comfortable as a hotel room in the city, Mr. Prowett said after opening the door. But compared to those hotels in the city, this place has more Brittany style. "This is already very good," Mr. Granger sincerely praised. Although the room style seemed a bit old, it was clear from the neat furniture that the host had put a lot of effort into entertaining guests. More importantly, these houses have obviously been modernized. So whether it's appliances or bathrooms, everything is available, and it doesn't seem as old as it first appears. Actually, the view from the second floor is quite good. While the adults started talking, Hugo and his sister came to their room and stood in front of the window looking out. At this time, it started to snow. Through the fluttering snowflakes, Hugo's sight passed over the hedgerows made of evergreens and saw the somewhat bare farmland in this season. After packing their luggage, Hugo and his sister walked towards the door. But just as his hand touched the doorknob, he was suddenly attracted by a palm-sized pattern on the side of the door. "What are you looking at?" Hermione, who was behind Hugo, saw him suddenly stop there with his hand on the handle, so she asked curiously, "Is there a spider?" "No, look at this," Hugo said, gesturing for Hermione to stand next to him, then pointing to a pattern clearly carved with a knife on the side of the door, and said, "What do you think this pattern looks like?" "It feels like two sparklers crossed together, and the kind that are lit," Hermione said after taking a look. "Besides that, I think the person who drew this picture is very likely to have obsessive-compulsive disorder." "Wait, where did you see the obsessive-compulsive disorder from?" After hearing Hermione's words, Hugo felt confused. Because he really didn't know how his sister could see the tendency of obsessive-compulsive disorder from this picture. "It's very simple. Haven't you noticed that this picture is completely symmetrical?" Hermione said with a matter-of-fact expression. "Even the sparks ejected from each sparkler are exactly the same." "Okay, you may be right." Hugo shrugged the corners of his mouth with a helpless expression, and then said, What I want to say is, if you ignore the fact that this picture doesn't have a frame, have you noticed that it looks a lot like the Boxburton's emblem? The Boxburton's emblem, right? After being reminded by Hugo, Hermione immediately reacted. Thinking about what Dad told us before, it seems that there is indeed a wizard in this family, and that wizard is likely to be our peer. Hugo went to look at the content carved on the door and said, "Because this carving mark is very new, it looks like it was carved in the last 2 years." After the Granger family packed their luggage and went downstairs, everyone started chatting in the warm living room. After all, the snow outside is getting heavier and heavier, and going out is not a good idea. Just as it was approaching noon, the sound of a car horn came from outside the door. Soon, 2 ladies braved the wind and snow and walked in from outside the room, each carrying large and small bags of things. Obviously, this was Mr. Prout's wife and daughter returning from shopping outside. After a simple greeting, everyone quickly busied themselves preparing lunch. Because all the adults present were busy preparing lunch, the task of entertaining Hugo and them fell on the host's daughter. Soon, this blonde young lady took them to chat in the living room on the first floor. "Excuse me, are you a Boxburton student?" After introducing himself, Hugo directly asked the girl named Elaine. The reason why he chose to be direct was because he saw that the pattern on the French-colored jewelry decorated on the brooch on Miss Prout's chest looked very complicated, but the core of it was the pattern of the Boxburton's emblem. "Are you also a wizard?" Miss Prout, who was just chatting awkwardly with Hermione about a TV series from a few years ago, was stunned after hearing Hugo's words, and then simply asked, "Yes, my sister and I are both third-year Hogwarts students," Hugo replied with a smile. Then looked at the other party politely. "Let's get to know each other again." After hearing what Hugo said, the girl named Elaine smiled and put her hand on her chest and gave a rather elegant salute and said, "Elaine Prout, a 5th-year Boxburton student." After exchanging their identities, they all relaxed a lot, because this meant that both sides finally didn't have to rack their brains to think about what was popular here when they weren't living in the ordinary human world these past few years. A giant squid in the Black Lake that can interact with everyone? That's really cool. After Hugo and the others introduced some interesting things in Hogwarts, Elaine showed a surprised expression. "Our school has ice sculptures that won't melt like diamonds, and there are mountain fairies singing beside us when we eat. But to be honest, there really isn't a creature as interesting as a giant squid." Chapter 268 New Ship Girl. Boxburton's style differs significantly from Hogwarts. If Hogwarts' greatest characteristic is its long history, then Boxburton's is a magic school that embodies elegance from beginning to end. Compared to Hogwarts, which looks like a military fortress, Boxburton's is a beautiful French palace nestled in the Pyrenees Mountains on the border between France and Spain. The entire campus is surrounded by magnificent gardens and fountains built using magic, creating a dazzling Rococo style. If a comparison is necessary, it resembles a miniature version of the Palace of Versailles. The school's style is attributed to Nicolas Flamel, a graduate who repeatedly donated money to construct fountains and palace buildings. Consequently, many structures have been renovated multiple times, making them appear newer than they actually are. Although Boxburton's was established over 200 years later than Hogwarts, its overall strength is not lacking. It is recognized as one of the top 3 European magic schools for good reason. For example, in the prestigious Triwizard Tournament, Boxburton's has won 62 championships, while Hogwarts has won 63. Moreover, compared to Hogwarts' focus on comprehensive development, Boxburton's lags slightly in many subjects. However, the school excels in alchemy, reigning supreme in the Western world for everyone. Encountering a wizard with a similar background in the Muggle world is a very fortunate event, so Hugo and the other 2 chatted very happily. After finishing their meal, Hugo and the others simply went to the study on the 2nd floor to chat. As they chatted, they talked about the alchemy competition held during the summer vacation. Compared to Hogwarts, Boxburton's pays significantly more attention to this competition. After all, this school is famous for its alchemy, so it naturally values this competition very much. "You're the Granger who got 2nd place in the competition." When Hugo mentioned his experience participating in the competition, Eileen looked at him with wide eyes. "The person who won the championship this time is a senior who has a good relationship with me. He told me that his award in the last competition was actually very lucky, and the real winner should have been you. Your senior is too modest." Hugo shook his head and said with a smile, "It can be said that everyone in that competition was very powerful, and I indeed failed to complete the competition project." Eileen also took alchemy as an elective in school. Therefore, during the subsequent chat, she asked Hugo many questions about alchemy. From these questions, Hugo could see that Boxbritons indeed has its own advantages in alchemy because they were going to travel near the Alps by plane the next day, and this place was indeed located in the countryside. There wasn't much interesting to do. So, not long after dark, everyone went back to their rooms to sleep. Commander, wake up. Around 1 a.m., Hugo was suddenly awakened from his dream. Then, he saw Enterprise and Firefly appear in the room. You finally arrived. Seeing the ship girls in the room, Hugo first yawned and then said, sorry, I was a little sleepy just now, so I fell asleep directly. Soon, Firefly drank the Polyjuice potion and disguised herself as Hugo, while Hugo, at Enterprise's request, used the Avatar to transform into Lolly Admiral and was carried on Enterprise's back. This feeling is really a bit strange. Just as Enterprise was carrying Hugo quickly across the field, Hugo slightly moved his body and said in a delicate voice, but it's very practical, isn't it? Enterprise quickly jumped over an irrigation ditch on the ground and said, after all, this place is a bit far from the highway, and it would be a waste of time to walk over slowly. After the two arrived on the highway, Enterprise took out a motorcycle from the ship equipment space and then drove Hugo towards the Brest City area. Soon, the two arrived at a small park. This small park obviously had a military memorial function. After bypassing a tank, they came to a huge cannon painted with white paint. This should be Richelieu's main gun. Noticing that there were no cameras or tourists around, Hugo returned to his original form, then patted the huge cannon and said, now it's time for these French ship girls to return to the team. Of course, dear Commander, Enterprise said while taking out various fetishes for summoning ship girls from her arms. We need new sisters to join us at all times. Greetings to the General. After a flash of light, several figures appeared in the open space in front of the cannon. Then, led by Richelieu, they collectively gave Hugo a military salute. Greetings to the brave French soldiers. Hugo gave a military salute to the ship girls in front of him, then looked at the ship girls standing straight there. All the ship girls summoned this time were from France. In addition to Richelieu, there were also George Leagues, de Grasse, Algérie, Lee Fantasque, Vauquelin, Lee Terrible, Melee Braise, Volta, and Mogator among them. There was one battleship ship girl, one heavy cruiser ship girl, two light cruiser ship girls, and 6 destroyer ship girls. Perhaps because there were a few more destroyer ship girls, they quickly gathered together and chatted after coming out. Okay, quiet down. After the summoning was over, Richelieu coughed lightly to calm down the chattering destroyers, then looked at Hugo and said, greetings to you, General. Please assign us tasks. Relax, don't be so nervous. Seeing Richelieu's serious face, Hugo quickly returned a military salute and then said, your task next is very simple. Just like everyone else, try to integrate into the local environment as much as possible. Because of the Admiral network, the French ship girls quickly understood their next task. Then, led by Richelieu, they collectively saluted Hugo again and left the park. Is Richelieu a little too serious? After the group of French ship girls left, Hugo changed back to the lolly form and turned to ask Enterprise. She has always been so serious. After all, she is the leader of the French ship girls, and the overall situation of the French ship girls in the port area is really not good. Enterprise sighed softly and said, so she has a lot of pressure on her, not to mention that her power mainly comes from our main body and our name, and our personality will also be affected by this. I think you should know what Cardinal Richelieu represents in history. I understand. After listening to Enterprise's explanation, Hugo immediately understood the reason why Richelieu was in this situation now, but he also believed that after the environment changed, everyone would always find a way to relax. Richelieu European cities basically have no nightlife after entering the night. Everyone often stays at home very early and does not go out. As for the bars or discos that are open now, they are not very suitable for Hugo and Enterprise. So, after roughly visiting the park, Hugo changed back to the lolly image and was taken back to his residence by Enterprise. Chapter 269 Alps. Because of some tricks by Richelieu and the others, no one noticed that Hugo had gone out once at night, not even Hermione, who was sleeping on a bed opposite Hugo. So, early the next morning, after breakfast, the two families took a plane to the Rhône-Alpes region in southeastern France, bordering Switzerland and Italy, where Mr. Pevet had booked a ski resort since Celine had already told her parents that Hugo and Hermione were wizards yesterday. Mr. Pevet suddenly stepped forward and asked Hugo about some things in the British wizarding world when there was no one around in the waiting hall. Pevet in the British wizarding world. Hermione thought for a while, then shook her head. Sorry, we don't seem to have heard of anyone with the surname Pevet at school. Wait, I seem to know one." Before Hermione could finish speaking, Hugo suddenly had a flash of inspiration and thought of something. "And we know this person. Who is this person?" After hearing Hugo say this, Hermione turned to look at him, with a curious look on her face. Because after filtering through the memories in her mind, she found that she really had no impression of this Mrs. Weasley was a pevet before she got married, Hugo said to his sister. "The Weasley twins told me this. He said they used to have two uncles, but they died in the last war. Is her name Molly?" Hearing Hugo and his sister's conversation, Mr. Pevet suddenly became excited and asked, "That's right, Mrs. Weasley's name is indeed Molly." Hugo nodded, then looked at him. "Wait, your surname is also Pevet. Could it be that you—" "Yes, I am a descendant of the Pevet family in the British wizarding world." Mr. Pevet shrugged with a smile. "Unfortunately, I don't have any talent for casting spells, so I was sent to the Muggle world to live with Muggles since I was a child." Obviously, this Mr. Pevet should be a squib like Filch. However, unlike Filch, he was sent to the Muggle world since he was a child. So he doesn't have too much obsession with the magical world because the genetic inheritance of magic is dominant and actively active. Squibs are rare in the magical world. If they choose to live in the wizarding world, most of them, as a disadvantaged group, will lead a mediocre and impoverished life. However, in some Muggle-born wizards or certain pure-blood wizard families, they will determine whether the child is a wizard when the child is very young, and then send those squibs to the Muggle world from an early age, allowing them to grow up like Muggles. The Pevet family obviously adopted this method, and because of this difference in thinking, Mr. Pevet's quality of life and inner feelings are much better than Filch or Mrs. Fig. Mr. Pevet knows very little about the wizarding world, because he hasn't had much contact with the wizarding world since he entered the Muggle world at the age of 6 or 7. So, to him, he actually doesn't have a close relationship with his relatives. And the reason why he asked Hugo about this today was just out of a subconscious concern for distant relatives because the waiting time was a bit boring. Hugo told Mr. Pevet about what he knew about the Pevet family in England. Speaking of which, the Pevet family can be considered a family of loyal martyrs. Mrs. Weasley's two brothers were both members of the Order of the Phoenix and died in the last Wizarding War, not to mention Mrs. Weasley, although we don't know what her Wizarding War is all about. I think my distant brothers are true heroes. After listening to Hugo's introduction, Mr. Pevet was silent for a while, and then said soon. The waiting time passed, and they arrived at the town at the foot of the Alps by high-speed rail, but after they checked into the hotel, they heard a notice that the ski resort was temporarily closed due to an avalanche. Avalanches shouldn't be common this season. Hearing the waiter say this, Hugo frowned, showing a thoughtful expression. After all, avalanches usually occur in the spring when the snowpack is unstable, not now. More importantly, these ski resorts with a long history have all been carefully considered before selecting a site, and basically will not choose places where avalanches or similar geological disasters are likely to occur as the site of the ski resort. The situation is a bit abnormal. Elaine walked over at this time and whispered behind Hugo and Hermione. "I just saw one of my seniors on the road. He now works in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement of the Ministry of Magic. As wizards, Hugo and the others naturally know that many seemingly normal things in the eyes of ordinary people in this world are actually related to magic. And the appearance of personnel from the French Ministry of Magic here also shows some kind of possibility from the side, of course. Correspondingly, the wizarding institutions of various countries will also try to control the occurrence of some situations to avoid some irreparable mistakes. Therefore, as long as the appearance of the French Ministry of Magic staff here is linked to the suddenly closed ski resort, Hugo and the others quickly guessed that the problem with the ski resort was likely related to the magical world. After everyone put down their luggage, Elaine quickly went out to check the situation alone. More than 40 minutes later, she brought back some bad news. "Bad news? I just chatted with that senior. As a result, he told me that a group of giants have recently appeared nearby, and even destroyed a building at the ski resort yesterday, so they can only use the avalanche as an excuse to temporarily prevent Muggles from entering the ski resort." "Giants?" Hermione asked, a little puzzled. "I remember that the giants in the Alps should all be semi-wild giants, and the ministries of magic of the surrounding countries can control their actions. The Ministry of Magic does say so, but because this place belongs to the border between France, Italy, and Sweden, there will always be various loopholes in management." Speaking of this topic, Elaine seemed a little angry. "This time, this group of giants entered our French territory from Switzerland, but the senior told me that after they contacted the Swiss Ministry of Magic, The other party actually said that it is the Christmas holiday now, and they don't have enough staff on duty, so they have to wait until the holiday is over before they can move out. Okay. That does sound very Swiss. Hugo shook his head helplessly. After all, the Air Force of this country will not take off after get off work, so it is very reasonable for their Ministry of Magic to slack off during the holidays. Of course, not being able to go to the ski resort does not mean that everyone has nothing to do. This town called Chamonix is one of the most beautiful towns at the foot of the Alps, with various tourist attractions and entertainment service facilities. However, when the two families returned to their rooms after having fun in the town for a day to prepare dinner, Hugo unexpectedly found an owl flapping its wings and flying to the balcony railing, and standing there seeing this, he walked onto the balcony and saw the owl raising a paw towards him, and at this time he realized that a small cloth bag was hanging on the owl's paw. Is this mine? After seeing the owl stretch out a paw to him, Hugo first asked subconsciously, and then stepped forward to take the cloth bag from the owl's paw. Chapter 270 Nicholas Flamel and Chapter X27, S Legacy. After the owl delivering the letter left, Hugo carefully examined the small cloth pouch in his hand. The pouch, only the size of his palm, looked very exquisite, but its opening was locked by some kind of special magical lock. Nicholas Flamel. After finding no clues on the surface of the pouch, Hugo held it in his hand and began to sense the magic on it. He quickly discovered that it was Nicholas Flamel who had sealed the pouch and applied the magical lock like human fingerprints. Each wizard's magical skills have slight differences, and because of his studies during the summer vacation, Hugo clearly understood Nicholas Flamel's characteristics in this regard. He simply drew a few ancient runic symbols on the pouch with his fingers, and after a few faint rays of light flashed, the pouch was opened. The moment he saw the contents of the pouch, Hugo's eyes widened. Because the pouch contained only two things, a piece of parchment and a stone that looked like a beautiful opal, subrayed Philosopher's Stone. After taking out the stone, Hugo subconsciously thought, because this thing looked so much like the failed Philosopher's Stones they had been shown during the last competition, but he quickly overturned his own point of view. After simply sensing the stone with rune magic, Hugo discovered that the power contained within the stone was far greater than those failed products. This is actually a Philosopher's Stone prototype that has completed the widening stage. After careful inspection, a shocked expression appeared on Hugo's face. The production process of the Philosopher's Stone needs to go through 3 stages: blackening, widening, and reddening. Unlike the natural situation of all things in the world from birth to death, the production of the Philosopher's Stone needs to violate this process, and the first step is to start from death. The so-called blackening is to completely decompose the raw materials, so that the various raw materials for making the Philosopher's Stone return to the original state of death. Widening is to obtain the power of new life from these forces of death. As for the final reddening, it is the most important step in the entire process, which can truly transform the Philosopher's Stone from ordinary matter into the 5th element independent of all matter. Of course, compared to the first 2 steps, the last step is also the most difficult. However, even so, the Philosopher's Stone prototype that has completed the blackening and widening steps is not a common thing. Even if they are not as powerful as the complete Philosopher's Stone, they have great effects in alchemy, pharmaceutics, and even spellcasting. Because of this kind of effect, even these semi-finished products are very expensive. At least some small pure-blood families may not be able to afford a perfectly widened semi-finished Philosopher's Stone. Of course, Nicholas Flamel sent Hugo this stone not simply to give him money. On the parchment next to the stone, Hugo found the last words left to him by the alchemy master. That's right, the alchemy master had already passed away, and this note was secretly prepared by him in a certain place, and would be randomly sent out 1 month after his death and delivered to Hugo's hands. The content of this letter was also very simple, just to tell Hugo that he had passed away, but as the most recognized colleague before his death, he hoped to leave something for this little friend. The thing is now hidden in the Alps. It won't be easy to find. Looking at the active map on the back of the parchment, Hugo showed a thoughtful expression. As an alchemist, the parchment Nicholas Flamel gave to Hugo was actually a marauder's map, which marked the surrounding situation and the distance to the treasure location, with Hugo's location as the center. And now, the treasure location shown on this map is only a few kilometers away from Hugo. Considering the local terrain, Hugo felt that the famous alchemist most likely hid the treasure in the Alps. I knew that, Admiral, you need us now. Just as Hugo began to ponder how he should go treasure hunting, a voice suddenly came from beside him. Hugo turned his head, and was surprised to find Richelieu standing on the balcony next door, looking at him with a smile. gently shaking a glass of champagne in her hand. "When did you guys come?" Looking at the two small heads that popped out behind Richelieu, Hugo's face showed a surprised expression. In addition to Richelieu, also came the Gros, Le Fantasque and l'Audeseux, two destroyer ship girls. "We arrived here only a few hours later than you." Richelieu raised the glass in her hand quite elegantly, and then said, "After all, everyone is worried about Admiral traveling here alone. With the ship girls, the next work will be much easier to handle. At least with enough manpower, Hugo will be able to complete this treasure hunt adventure without alarming anyone that night." Richelieu had the Gros, who had previously gone to the town to scout, drink Polyjuice potion and impersonate Hugo. And she and the two destroyer ship girls took Hugo away from the hotel together. Considering that there were personnel from the French Ministry of Magic active nearby, Hugo transformed into the young East Asian admiral through the Avidar system when leaving the hotel, and then went to another city more than 20 kilometers away with Richelieu in the way of ordinary people. When they were sitting on the local 24-hour travel bus leaving the town, they indeed found personnel from the French Ministry of Magic hidden near the road and on the high ground around the town. The other party is now protecting this town. After simply observing the positions of the dozen or so wizards, Richelieu leaned over and whispered, "Fortunately, we didn't go directly up the mountain from the town, otherwise there is a high probability that we would be discovered by them. It seems that being cautious is not a bad thing." Hearing Richelieu say this, Hugo also breathed a sigh of relief. After all, no one wants to cause trouble. It would be troublesome if there were any conflicts with this group of staff from the French Ministry of Magic. After the four of them arrived at their destination, they quickly boarded Richelieu's carrier-based aircraft in an uninhabited place on the outskirts of the town and flew towards the snow-capped mountains not far away. The seaplane quickly passed through the valley. Both sides of the valley were snow-capped mountains, and the bottom of the valley was a frozen river. Judging from the various strange ice blocks on the river surface, this should be a very turbulent river in summer. It should be in the upstream area of this river valley. Hugo stared at the map in his hand and transmitted the contents above to the ship girls in real time through the Admiral network. The reason why an extra procedure is needed is because there is a special magic on this map. People other than Hugo can only see a blank piece of parchment. It still feels a bit cold. As the plane continued to penetrate into the mountains, the surrounding temperature became colder and colder. Just as Hugo was rubbing his hands non-stop from the cold, he suddenly heard a loud noise. "It's an avalanche." The sharp-eyed Le Fantasque looked at the place where the sound came from for the first time, and found that on a mountain range not far ahead, a large mass of snow directly collapsed, and then rushed towards the valley below. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 271 Killing. "Damn it, our planned navigation point is not far from that avalanche site," Richelieu muttered, after quickly comparing the treasure location she had just measured with the avalanche site. Sure enough, when the plane arrived at the planned landing site, they found the ground covered with a layer of ice and snow mixed with rocks, making it impossible to land helpless. Richelieu had to fly the plane a few thousand meters away before finding an open space on a gentle slope in the mountains where she could barely land the plane. "Looks like we'll have to change our mode of transportation next," Richelieu said, taking out 4 Type 3 imagination broomsticks from her ship equipment space. Then mounting one and flying towards their destination. It should be that place. Flying on a broomstick in this cold mountainous area was not a good idea, which is why Richelieu used the plane just now. Fortunately, just as Hugo was about to freeze, Formidable finally spotted the target indicated on the map. After connecting to Formidable's vision through the Admiral network, Hugo saw a cave appearing on the cliff face, but the snow in front of the cave entrance was covered with a series of huge footprints. "These should be ogre footprints," Hugo said. After landing on the ground, Hugo and the others looked down at the huge footprints on the ground, each of which looked as big as a child's sled. "It's not just ogres," Formidable said, standing on the other side of the cave. Although the footprint in front of her was about the same size as the other footprints, a clear sole print could be seen, unless they are ogres trained by humans. Wild ogres are basically barefoot. And in the wild, there is only one kind of creature with such big feet that wears shoes, and that is a giant. Although giants seem to think of wizards as stupid, in reality, giants are not much less intelligent than humans, but their personalities are more irritable, making them rarely willing to calm down and think. Because of this, compared to ogres who are more like beasts, giants live closer to humans. So they prepare all kinds of clothes and tools for themselves, which naturally includes the shoes that left these footprints. "Get ready for battle," Richelieu said, drawing a saber from her ship equipment space, while throwing a light machine gun to Hugo. And both Imagination and Formidable took out anti-aircraft machine guns from their ship equipment after fully arming themselves. The four formed a battle formation and walked step by step towards the cave. Not far into the cave, a stench rushed out from inside. It must be ogres. Only they can emit such a smell that smells worse than a public toilet's septic tank. "Giants usually don't smell this bad," Imagination said to Hugo with a displeased expression through the Admiral network. Although they had just arrived in this world, they had never seen a real giant, but because the shipgirls who had been active in the north before had seen some scattered exiled giants, these French shipgirls still knew what giants looked like. After advancing more than 10 meters along the tunnel, Hugo saw a little bit of firelight appearing on the cave wall in front of him, and at the same time, a sharp scolding sound came from the depths of the cave. "Let me see." After discovering that they were approaching the target, Richelieu released her ship-based reconnaissance aircraft, and then connected the reconnaissance aircraft's vision to the Admiral network. After passing through the bend ahead, the reconnaissance aircraft entered a huge cave. As a result, she saw a fire burning in the center of the cave, surrounded by a group of huge shadows like small mountains. "Is this an internal strife?" After seeing the specific situation in the cave clearly, Hugo and the others all showed surprised expressions because sitting around the bonfire were 2 male giants and 8 ogres. And in the middle of them lay a female giant who was tied up. "What are they saying?" Listening to the giants making unpleasant shouts, Hugo asked the ship girls next to him. Because he couldn't understand what these giants were saying at all. These 2 male giants and the 8 ogres are one faction, while the female giant tied there is another faction. At this time, Massachusetts, who had joined the Admiral network, quickly translated the giants' conversation. "The male giants are the landlords here, controlling the 8 ogres as their slaves. And this female giant is an outsider, regarded as an invader by these 2 male giants. Now this female giant is about to be killed and eaten by the male giants and ogres, because this female giant prevented them from catching ordinary people to eat yesterday. You don't let us eat little people, we're hungry, you come and fill my belly." Just after the fire burned more vigorously, a male giant stood up from the edge of the fire, then grabbed a stone ground knife and walked towards the female giant. "It seems like this is the end." The female giant named White Deer closed her eyes. She had thought about being caught by a wizard and repatriated, imprisoned, or even killed, but she never thought she would be killed and eaten by her own kind. However, just as she closed her eyes and waited for death to come, she did not feel the pain in her neck. Instead, she heard a series of popping sounds ringing in her ears. When she opened her eyes, she saw the 2 ogres who had been sitting near the cave entrance fall down with more than a dozen wounds on their bodies. 3 humans were using muggle metal ones to strap the ogres on the other side. Richelieu avoided the wooden stick swept over by the giant and jumped onto the giant's body. Then she swung the saber in her hand and slashed fiercely at the giant's neck. The giant's skin is similar to that of a fire dragon. It not only has powerful magical defense capabilities, but also has the top 3 physical defense capabilities among land magical creatures. But when facing the ship equipment weapon in Richelieu's hand, these defenses were no stronger than a piece of parchment. She just waved the saber in her hand with force, and half of the giant's neck and cervical spine were easily cut in 2 with one blow. Taking advantage of the first giant's crashing down, Richelieu borrowed strength to jump directly to the side of another giant and cut off the giant's leg from the knee with one knife, then stepped forward 2 steps and cut off the giant's head with 2 knives. Just as Richelieu finished dealing with the 2 giants, all 8 ogres also fell to the ground with the wounds all over their bodies. Blood gushed out and gathered into a small blood-red pool on the cave floor. Hugo did kill an ogre by continuously head-shooting it with a light machine gun in this process. But the remaining 7 ogres were all killed by the 2 ship girls. Although the 13.2mm heavy machine guns used by the 2 destroyer ship girls were relatively weak in the history of World War II, when facing flesh and blood, these large-caliber machine gun bullets only needed 7 or 8 rounds to end the life of an ogre. Soon, everything was over. Richelieu stood on the giant's corpse, propping herself up with a saber in both hands and scanning the entire cave. And in front of her, the entire cave had become a slaughterhouse full of flesh and blood. 35 seconds, everyone's speed is not bad this time. After Hugo and the others gave the huge monsters lying on the ground a final shot each, Richelieu raised her wrist, looked at her watch, and nodded in satisfaction. Chapter 272 Atavistic Giant. In reality, Richelieu and the others weren't human supremacists. At least, As far as the ship girls were concerned, they saw little difference between any creature other than their comrades and their admiral. The only reason they had gone on a killing spree, wiping out these ogres and giants, was because these fellows had actually chosen to feed on intelligent beings, crossing their bottom line. After all, they were ship girls, and the warships that were their original forms were the crystallization of human wisdom and civilization. Therefore, their moral inclinations weren't much different from those of humans. Naturally, they couldn't accept such barbaric behavior. Of course, there was also an objective reason for them doing this. That was that both giants and ogres were warlike and easily angered, so once a fight started, it would be to the death, and there was no possibility of prisoners. After confirming that these giants and ogres were all killed, Hugo walked towards the female giant who was tied up on the ground. Because of the battle just now, the female giant was covered in foul-smelling blood, making her look even more disheveled. Good person, good person. Seeing Richelieu holding a military saber and approaching her step by step, the female giant's face revealed a look of fear, and at the same time, she kept shouting in French. However, Richelieu didn't use the saber to chop at her. Instead, she walked to her side and used the saber in her hand to cut the ropes binding her one by one, and then let her sit up. Just as the giant sat up, letting the flames illuminate her face, Hugo made a surprised sound. Because this giant's appearance was completely different from what he had imagined. As everyone knows, the biggest characteristic of giants, the reason they are called giants, is their enormous size. Male giants, after reaching adulthood, are about 7 to 7.5 meters tall, while female giants are shorter. Apart from that, with the exception of those who are mixed blood with human wizards, the biggest characteristics of giants are their rough skin and ugly faces. Even in terms of appearance, they don't particularly resemble a giant version of humans, but the female giant in front of him was completely different. She had long hair like flames scattered over her head, and beneath her long hair was a face that was rugged by human standards, but definitely not ugly. More importantly, her body wasn't as deformed as that of a real giant from a human perspective. On the contrary, she looked very strong, and overall, she looked like the female barbarian in Hugo's previous life's game Diablo, only much bigger. Honestly, if she didn't look at least 7 meters tall, Hugo might have suspected that she was a mixed-blood giant, not a real giant. In addition to her appearance, this giant's skin was also obviously smoother. It wasn't as rough as stone like other giants, but had a bronze sheen. The bronze color here isn't just a description of color, because under the illumination of the flames, this female giant's skin really emitted a metallic sheen. An ancestral giant, these giants really exist. Richelieu also noticed a metallic luster on this female giant's body, and stepped forward to stroke the giant's skin. Seeing Richelieu's actions, Hugo's face showed a nervous look. Because giants usually might start fighting just by glancing at each other, let alone touching them directly like this. But unexpectedly, this female giant didn't show any anger at all. On the contrary, when Richelieu reached out to try to touch her, she obediently knelt down, and then stretched out her arm to make it easier for Richelieu to stroke her. Seeing this scene, Hugo realized that in addition to their habitual rage, giants had a tradition of the strong being king. For example, the leaders of their tribes are basically the biggest and strongest in the tribe. Therefore, a strong person like Richelieu, who had easily killed 2 giants in a very short period of time using pure physical attacks, would naturally gain respect, and would even be regarded by the giants as an object of worship from the bottom of their hearts. This giant is different from normal giants. After a simple examination, Richelieu came to a conclusion. The touch of her skin is close to that of a human with rough skin, rather than rock. But it is more tenacious in terms of strength. What does this mean? After hearing Richelieu's conclusion, Hugo asked, I just heard you say something about an ancestral giant. Can you tell me what an ancestral giant is? Why haven't I ever heard of this before, General? It's normal that you haven't heard of this, because these things have been hidden by the wizards. Richelieu looked at Hugo and said, if it wasn't for Javelin entering training early because of her outstanding performance, we wouldn't know this. As Richelieu explained, Hugo also understood the secret behind this. The so-called ancestral giants can be regarded as the most powerful group of giants. They are naturally considered to be the leaders and elites among the giants. Different from ordinary giants, these giants, in addition to being superior to ordinary giants in terms of physical strength and power, have a clear advantage in intelligence, and also possess the inheritance of the giants. Moreover, they can also be easily judged from their appearance. Compared to other strangely shaped giants, ancestral giants look more like enlarged versions of strong humans, and are much more beautiful than ordinary giants. Just like what was said before, giants are not ogres, they are a standard civilized race. So naturally, there are some unique knowledge and civilization inheritances that belong to them. The reason why giants are becoming more and more barbaric now, and even degenerating to the point where they are not much stronger than ogres, is also related to these ancestral giants, because they were wrongly involved in the internal wars between wizards. Because these ancestral giants have a way of thinking that is closer to humans, they naturally have various complex ideas, and as a result, in the two wizard civil wars, they were easily bewitched by black wizards and joined the war. Although giants can't cast spells, under the command of these ancestral giants, those giants still caused great damage to the wizards in the war with their powerful magic resistance and equipment. But in the end, the black wizard they supported still failed, and then they were strictly controlled by the wizards of the entire wizarding world until today. Even more because of this failure, ancestral giants suddenly changed from giant leaders to public enemies of giants. This is also one of the reasons why this white deer lady was almost killed. Richelieu pointed to the female giant who was kneeling there nervously. They are now considered by many giants to be a symbol of disaster, so that's how it is. Hugo nodded, and then asked further. Then why do they call them ancestral giants? Is it because ancient giants all look like them? Of course not. If that were really the case, it wouldn't be humans who became the most powerful creatures on this earth. Richelieu smiled and shook her head. This is just the name given to them by the wizards. Their own name should be great giants. The reason why wizards call them ancestral giants is because early giants were even regarded as gods by ordinary people in the era when the magical world had not separated from the ordinary world. But in terms of name, they certainly cannot be called god giants. For the giant race, big is beautiful. So from this naming, you can see the respect and envy of ordinary giants for these ancestral giants. But because these ancestral giants have almost completely disappeared in wars and civil strife, and coupled with the fact that wizards' original human supremacy itself is unwilling to admit that there are giants as smart as humans, so after the end of the Second Wizarding War, the wizards slowly erased the traces of their existence in the wizarding world. Only those Aurors who are considered elites and some Ministry of Magic staff know of their existence. If that's the case, I have a question. After listening to Richelieu's story about ancestral giants, Hugo asked, then what exactly is going on with our Miss White Deer? Why would she appear here alone? Chapter 273 Prophecy and Giants. Because of a prophecy from a centaur, after discovering that the giantess did not speak human languages very well, Richelieu stepped forward to take on the responsibility of translating. After a brief inquiry, the giant white deer quickly stated the purpose of her journey. Just as Richelieu had said, after the end of the two wizarding wars, the situation of giants throughout the Western world became very bad. Giants suddenly became the public enemy of the wizarding world. Even the small tribe to which White Deer belonged, which had not participated in the war, was forced to move all the way east from their old home near the Alps, all the way to the desolate and uninhabited mountains of northern Finland. However, as a tribe that had not participated in the wizarding war, the ancestral giants in this tribe still possessed that lofty status and led this small tribe of only 6 people to survive in the wilderness. At the same time, because they tended towards pacifism, they gradually established relatively harmonious relationships with the surrounding intelligent creatures, such as centaurs or merpeople. The reason why this giantess braved the risks and traveled thousands of miles across multiple countries to come here was also very simple. An elder centaur familiar with them had made a prophecy about the imminent outbreak of war. In the prophecy, this war would bring tremendous changes to the entire world, especially for giants. And to survive this war that would sweep across the entire Western world, the only way was to go to their old home to find a glimmer of hope. I'm just doing a simple translation. The centaur's actual prophecy is very complex. It also contains a series of content related to celestial phenomena and burning herbs. I've only extracted the meaningful parts. After finishing the translation, Richelieu explained. After all, centaurs are indeed relatively accurate in terms of prophecy. But relatively speaking, they are also very vague in their wording. Therefore, if it wasn't translated, Hugo basically wouldn't understand. These centaurs do possess some skills that human wizards do not. After hearing Richelieu's explanation, Hugo nodded and said, after all, the mainstream of society now believes that Voldemort is dead, and everything has calmed down. No one thought that the Dark Lord would make a comeback soon after. After clarifying the ins and outs of the matter, Hugo asked Richelieu to inquire about the next plans of this giant named White Deer. After all, this giant not only doesn't eat people, but also helped humans last time. Therefore, Hugo and the others naturally couldn't harm her. What Hugo didn't expect was that as soon as Richelieu finished asking in Giantish, the giantess immediately lay down on the ground and tried to kiss the ground at Richelieu's feet. This posture startled Richelieu, and then she quickly inquired about the reason. As a result, she learned that White Deer had been completely impressed by Richelieu's powerful combat strength, so she hoped to recognize her as her master. Moreover, she believed that the glimmer of hope mentioned in the centaur's prophecy was Richelieu. Okay, I do have a good territory where I can settle you. After quickly discussing with Hugo through the Admiral network, Richelieu said, "We will ensure that you are treated fairly, but you must also abide by our rules." The reason why Hugo made the decision to accept the giants was also very simple. After all, his goal was to completely change the magical world. And in the process of fighting against those pure-blood families who have absolute advantages, it is natural to unite as many people as possible. Moreover, the giants are not just eating for free after being taken in. As powerful creatures with strong strength and magic resistance, they have their own advantages in many aspects. As for the problem of being difficult to control for ordinary people, it is basically not a problem for Hugo and the others. After all, the weight of a powerful adult male giant is only about 15 tons, and a destroyer-class ship girl can easily beat them down in a melee. Unlike ordinary wizards who use magic to attack giants and incur the giants' anger, if you can defeat the giants in a melee, the giants will naturally submit. Therefore, for the ship girls, as long as they master the skill of speaking with their fists and communicate with them with their fists a few more times, the giants will definitely be able to obey orders and follow commands. White Deer certainly didn't know what Hugo and his ship girls had discussed through the Admiral network. But in her opinion, becoming a subordinate of such a strong person would naturally ensure that their small tribe could survive. Therefore, after Richelieu's words fell, White Deer once again knelt on the ground and kissed the ground at Richelieu's feet, expressing her willingness to be loyal to this strong person. After using the ship equipment space to collect the corpses of those giants and trolls, the ship girls once again searched this giant settlement in the Alps. As a result, besides a stone pot that was half-made, a few telephone poles used as weapons, and the scraps of clothing left after eating people, nothing was found. This should be the giant crime syndicate that the Ministry of Magic mentioned. After looking at the traces left after eating people, Richelieu said with a serious face, "Although many giants were exiled after the collapse of the Second Dark Lord back then, there are always some who slip through the net, so it can be said that the wizarding world has not done enough in this regard," Hugo said, watching White Deer use a telephone pole to dig a hole in the ground and bury these remains. At least if they were a little more serious, these tragedies could have been avoided. After burying these remains and mourning for a few minutes, Hugo and the others once again embarked on their treasure hunt. The only difference from before was that this time a big guy joined their team. The weather looks very good today, with stars all over the sky. Riding their brooms and following the mountain path upwards, they quickly approached the location of the treasure on the map. It was a small platform near the top of the mountain, now covered with ice and snow. And when White Deer cleaned the ice and snow off the platform, they quickly found a rough stone block 2 meters in diameter placed on the platform. It should be under the stone. After walking around the platform, Hugo pointed to the slightly abrupt stone and said, after confirming the location, Conxiang and Kibu stood on both sides of the stone, grabbed the stone, and lifted it with force to move the stone away. Then they saw a stone slab appearing below the stone just now. This treasure is hidden too carelessly. After stepping forward and forcefully uncovering the stone, a silver box appeared at the bottom of the pit. Judging from the reaction of the parchment, the box should contain what Hugo and the others were looking for this time. No, this is a very clever approach. Looking at the box being taken out, Hugo said with a serious face, compared to complex mechanisms and powerful traps, this kind of treasure hiding method is the most difficult to crack. Just like the Horcrux is hidden by that noseless guy, the one hidden in the room of requirement is actually the most difficult to find. If Harry wasn't the child of destiny, normal people might never have thought that that thing was hidden in a pile of garbage, and this treasure is also the same. If it weren't for this map, no one would be able to find this treasure location, which is basically indistinguishable from the surrounding area, among so many peaks in the Alps. To be honest, maybe because Voldemort himself was born a half-blood, he was passionate about those things with a strong sense of ritual. If it weren't for this reason, he only needed to throw any Horcrux into the sea, and the difficulty of finding it would be several orders of magnitude higher. Of course, throwing it into the sea also has its problems. For example, in this way, it is difficult to ensure that the Horcrux is under control, and it may be lost inexplicably one day. And this is completely unacceptable to Voldemort, who hopes to control everything. Just as he was thinking this, the ship girls also cleaned the silver box and finished checking it, and then Richelieu handed the open box to Hugo. Chapter 274 Subplane. Why a pendant? The moment Hugo saw the item in the silver box, a look of confusion appeared on his face because in his eyes, this golden enamel pendant, which looked a circle larger than an ordinary silver coin, was pretty enough and gorgeous enough, but to say it was something left behind by a great alchemist was far from the truth. General, you should try the parchment and the semi-finished alchemical stone from before. Seeing Hugo staring at the pendant in front of him without saying a word, Kong Xiong suddenly said from the side, "The other party definitely didn't give you those two things for you to look at." "That makes sense." Hugo nodded, and then began to try. The parchment obviously didn't react, but the semi-finished Philosopher's Stone showed a clear reaction as soon as it was placed on it. The pendant lit up, and in the colorful light, the semi-finished Philosopher's Stone quickly melted like an ice cube under the scorching sun. Then, it turned into pearly mist and merged into the pendant. This process was so fast that before Hugo could react, the semi-finished alchemical stone, like an opal, had completely disappeared from his hand. It's actually delayed transmutation. After examining it, a look of shock appeared on Hugo's face, because he realized that the pendant had a preset alchemical procedure that would activate when it came into contact with the semi-finished alchemical stone. Hugo was shocked because this was an alchemical technique that was easy to learn but difficult to master, and its alchemical effect was closely related to the caster's magic power and alchemy level. Taking Hugo himself as an example, at his current level, it wouldn't be too difficult to create one or two simple mechanisms based on this principle, but he definitely couldn't reach the level of easily mobilizing all the power in a semi-finished alchemical stone. Of course, the alchemical ritual that could be completed using such powerful magic power was not simple either. Just as the alchemical ritual ended, Hugo discovered that the pendant in his hand actually showed him a space coordinate. What has this pendant become now? A talisman. Sensing the magical fluctuations coming from the talisman just now, Richelieu turned her face and asked, "Of course not. How could such a powerful magical reaction be a low-end product like a talisman?" After figuring out the purpose of the pendant, Hugo said with a smile to the ladies present, "This is a spatial equipment similar to Newt's commander's suitcase, but unlike the spatial equipment sold on the market, this kind of spatial equipment is more like a subdimension described in novels than an expanded space." After a brief explanation, Hugo led the ship girls and the giantess white deer into the space inside the pendant. As a ball of white light flashed before their eyes, they found themselves standing on a small cobblestone paved square, and opposite the square was a 3-story building in the 15th century style. "I seem to have an impression of this building." The moment Richelieu saw the building, she quickly took 2 steps to the entrance of the building, and then walked around the entire building several times. Soon, she came to the front of the building, and then pointed to a place by the door and said, "That's right. It's here, Nicolas Flamel's former residence on Montmorency Street in Paris. If that's the case, then let's go in and take a look." After hearing Richelieu recognize the origin of the room, Hugo immediately became interested because this pendant was left to him by Nicolas Flamel after all, so if there was anything important, it would most likely be left in this room. Gently pushing the door, it opened. Then, a simply decorated living room appeared in front of everyone, and in the center of the living room, a soccer-sized crystal ball was placed on a gorgeous golden base that was completely the opposite of the living room style. After checking, Hugo found that this crystal ball was the core control hub of this space. Only by truly branding this crystal ball with his own mark could this space belong to him. That's right, this is a subdimension, similar to the space with a dragon and a sacred oak tree that Hugo and the others saw underground in Hogwarts before. Different from the space expanded by the space expansion charm, this subdimension is a stable, small self-circulating ecosystem that can operate independently of the main plane for a long time. Historically, there are very few subdimensions that can truly accommodate people. Not to mention how difficult it is to find a suitable piece of space debris in nature. The magic skills and resources required to transform this fragment into a subdimension are beyond the reach of ordinary wizards. Nearly square, 120 square kilometers, 6 kilometers up and down. Richelieu, who was connected to Hugo through the Admiral network, quickly sensed the information left in the crystal ball. Is this really something ordinary people can do? So, Mr. Flamel has crossed that line. I think this may be the most important reason why he chose to destroy the Philosopher's Stone and face death with a smile. Because for him, death is indeed a new journey. It's a pity that, General, you are not an ancient god. Richelieu looked at Hugo, who was checking the crystal ball, and said, "If you become an ancient god, then there is absolutely no need to cross that line through death." Mr. Flammel, you really left me a difficult problem. In the middle of the conversation, Hugo finished the inspection, and then muttered with a smile. Obviously, Nicholas Flamel did regard Hugo as a fellow traveler in the previous exchanges. So when he finally left this inheritance to him, he also left a test. The content of the test is very simple, that is to completely master this subdimension. And before passing the test, this subdimension can only be used as a key to communicate through that brooch. General, with your current soul strength, you will definitely not be able to brand your soul on it. Through the Admiral network, Richelieu quickly sensed the characteristics of this test. I know, after all, I have only been learning magic for too short a time, and my accumulation is far less than that of the great alchemist who has accumulated it for 600 years, Hugo smiled and said. But I have you. For Hugo, relying solely on his own strength would naturally be impossible to brand this subdimension now. And Nicholas Flamel also realized this, so he set up such a key to facilitate Hugo's use. However, this great alchemist obviously did not expect that the Admiral network mastered by Hugo could completely concentrate the power of the ship girls, and then brand it on this subdimension as a whole. Alright, my Valkyries, release your souls. After making a decision, Hugo immediately communicated with the ship girls through the Admiral network, and then concentrated the power of the ship girls to condense rune after rune at his fingertips. Soon, rune after rune containing power flew from Hugo's fingertips, and after flying around the crystal ball a few times, they sank into the crystal ball. As these runes flew in, the crystal ball became brighter and brighter, until it turned into a small sun that only had light and no heat. Just as the light reached an extreme, the entire crystal ball disappeared into the air. It's done. As the crystal ball disappeared, Hugo felt a special connection between himself and this space, which meant that he had mastered this subdimension. Chapter 275 The Final Legacy. After mastering this subdimension, Hugo finally realized just how powerful that great alchemist, who had lived for over 600 years and taken a crucial step in alchemy, truly was. Under Nicholas Flamel's alchemical modification, this subdimension can absorb sunlight and power from the void, providing a continuous source of energy for the entire space. And with the input of energy, this land can be used for breeding and planting. What's even better is that this dimension has complex terrain, with lakes, swamps, forests, and snow mountains, making it easy to accommodate the breeding and planting of various creatures. The only bad thing is that this place is still a bit small, Hugo said, feigning dissatisfaction. It would be great if this place could be bigger. The area of that place isn't fixed, because Hugo was connected through the Admiral network before. The ship girls quickly figured out what was going on inside this space. Nicholas Flamel left a lot of interfaces when he created this space, Richelieu said, with a large amount of data quickly surging through her eyes. So we can completely expand this space in the future. Okay, I underestimated that great alchemist. Hugo nodded with a smile, and then continued to check the situation of this subdimension. In addition to the space itself, this subdimension also brought Hugo and the others an extra benefit, which is having a transportation network completely independent of all existing transportation systems. In fact, even Nicholas Flamel, the creator of the entire space, had never thought of this usage. Because no normal human being could imagine the existence of the Admiral network, which could unite the souls of everyone. And because of the existence of the Admiral network, every existence on this network has obtained the permission of this space. That is to say, Hugo and the ship girls can use this space as a transfer station to go to the location of anyone else. I think this is more useful than having another space. After seeing this ability, Richelieu's face showed an excited expression for the ship girls. This function that allows them to appear by the Admiral's side at any time is what makes them most satisfied, at least for now. The ship girls feel that if they could appear by their Admiral's side at any time, then their Admiral's safety would obviously be improved by more than one level. Soon, several space doors appeared in the courtyard of the room. Then, the ship girls distributed in Europe walked out of the space doors and looked at the surrounding environment with happy faces. Don't worry, my Admiral, now we control a very large area of territory in Russia. It's too easy to accommodate several giant tribes, Sovetskaya Rossiya said while chugging a bottle of vodka. Recently, the area we control has expanded again. After all, there are too many uninhabited wastelands in Siberia. We only need to spend a small amount of money to buy large tracts of land when we develop those places. Moreover, whether it is the officials of the wizarding world or the officials of the ordinary human world, after realizing that we are really developing the wasteland, they have given us a lot of preferential policies. Wait, what's going on with the ordinary human world? After hearing Sovetskaya Rossiya say this, Hugo showed a surprised expression. Don't tell me you hired ordinary people to raise dragons. How is that possible? Sovetskaya Rossiya shook her head and said. At first, we were worried that ordinary people would run to our place, so we simply bought the surrounding land through the sisters who were active in the ordinary human world. Then, after the land was in hand, we felt that it was inappropriate to just leave it there after buying it, so we tried to develop this wasteland. It just so happened that Russia's eastern neighbor is now starting large-scale commodity trade with the West, and the land we control includes land on both sides of the railway. So it can just be used to build warehouses and make some logistics supplies. You know that we can speak Chinese, so we basically obtained a large part of the business in the middle of this line. So even in the world of ordinary people, we have our own power, Kirov said as he walked over. In addition, these industries in the ordinary human world have also given us a new cornerstone. We can accept those squibs who are excluded from the wizarding world. That sounds really good, Hugo nodded with satisfaction. Especially compared to the wealth gained, it is most important to organize more talents through these industries. Just as Hugo and the others were chatting, the female giant white deer, who had eaten and drunk her fill, started wrestling with the ship girls by the bonfire. For giants, wrestling together after eating and drinking is a popular social activity, of course. For this female giant, she felt that her worldview had been impacted like never before in the next half hour, because each of these small female humans could throw her around like a sandbag. However, after this bonfire side exchange, White Deer's attitude was obviously much gentler than before, and after the party, she obediently followed Sovetskaya Rossiya out of this subdimension just as the ship girls were gathering together for a bonfire party. Hugo, Richelieu, Enterprise, Intrepid, and Salem walked together to the attic that did not exist before they controlled this subdimension. My friend, it seems that you have truly touched a certain limit of power. The moment they stepped into the attic, Nicholas Flamel's phantom appeared in the room and said, "This room contains all my alchemical insights. If you are willing, you can take a look at these materials. They may help you find a true path." This is too generous. After that, Nicholas Flamel's projection disappeared. Salem's face showed a surprised look. This can be said to be the foundation of an alchemist. How could it be taken out like this? This is not surprising, Enterprise said, thinking of the time she spent with Hugo and Nicholas Flamel before. Because for Nicholas Flamel, a fellow traveler is far more important than knowledge. If we use the Eastern saying, Nicholas Flamel should now be considered to have ascended to immortality through corpse liberation. So all the wealth of this world is really not as precious to him as a fellow traveler. The knowledge mastered by a top alchemist who has lived for 600 years is an astronomical number for ordinary people, and there is a lot of unbelievable content inside. For example, Nicholas Flamel restored fairy silver just by using samples, but he did this through the power of the Philosopher's Stone, which can distort some rules in alchemy. If we have the Philosopher's Stone, the cost of producing those magic alloys can be reduced by at least 90%. Intrepid said thoughtfully after looking at a Morgan silver coin that had been turned into fairy silver. But the problem is that compared to the method of industrializing the production of fairy silver by building a special furnace, it is too difficult to make a Philosopher's Stone. Hugo shook his head and said, "At least for me, it is difficult for me to create a new Philosopher's Stone in a short period of time, but everyone can create that complex magic furnace." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.